G'day, May 40 here. So Donald Trump represents a significant change in the Republican Party from the Reagan years, when Ronald Reagan would talk about government is the problem. Well, when your city's burning down, right, you turn to government. Reminds me of a series of newspaper ads that the ACLU ran in Los Angeles with the headline, when the gang wears blue, meaning the LAPD colors, like, who do you call when you've got an emergency? Well, you call the police, right? No matter how corrupt the police are in the United States, the best of my knowledge, in a life and death situation where you've got people threatening to kill you, you're going to turn to the police. And when your home's in danger of burning down, you're going to turn to the fire department. When a major freeway breaks apart under the force of an earthquake, you need the government. People rely on Social Security. So this old Reagan-era Republican message, government is the problem. Well, sometimes government is the problem. Sometimes private business is the problem. Sometimes lack of excellence in government services is the problem. And right now, California is serving as a symbol for failures of Democratic Party governance. The Democratic Party dominates California, ergo, that which is political, right? The responsibility for that rests at the feet of the Democrats. Los Angeles is a city dominated by the Democratic Party. And so problems with efficiency in government services, such as firefighting, they lie at the feet of the Democrats. And symbols are important. Symbols just kind of capture in one little thing a whole big, deeper body of information. So we make decisions about people just like that often, because we encounter strangers and we make decisions based on how they dress, their skin color, any religious symbols that they are wearing. And the reason we make these instantaneous decisions is because they serve us. It's not that there is intrinsic importance in skin pigmentation. It's that many people have found that skin pigmentation signifies a whole bunch of deeper issues. So when you encounter people of Northeast Asian ancestry, they are more likely to drive carefully. They are more likely to conduct their romantic and sex lives carefully. They're more likely to make cautious decisions with their lives. They're more likely to have more family solidarity than your average American. They're more likely to earn more per hour, to be more educated, to have more household wealth, to have stronger, tighter relations with their family. There are a whole bunch of traits that are symbolized by any visual cues about Northeast Asian ancestry. Similarly, when you encounter someone of African ancestry, they're more likely to be outgoing. They're more likely to be spontaneous. They're more likely to be social than people of Northeast Asian ancestry or people of European heritage. So we make all sorts of split decisions based on symbols. Sometimes my eyes tear up at a particularly beautiful rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner, because that anthem symbolizes for me the United States of America. The side of the flag has an emotional meaning to me. It's just a symbol, you say, but symbols are incredibly important, right? Just in that little symbol, it tips you off about a whole bunch of more detailed and complicated messages that are just contained in that split-second symbol that crosses your eyesight, and you can't help but react. Right? The reason we employ stereotypes is because stereotypes are often useful in helping us to navigate reality. And right now, there is a stereotype that seems to have considerable validity, that government in the Los Angeles Fire Department is not particularly on top of it. And another symbol that I notice, that whenever you have leaders talking about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that seems to always be accompanied by failures of efficient operation. It's a symbol of an institution in decline, and they start focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, rather than flat-out meritocracy and excellence.
The city's response to those wildfires continues to grow. News Nation has now obtained a letter from top Los Angeles Fire Department officials demanding that the department's chief step down. So let's bring in investigative reporter Rich McHugh live for us in Los Angeles following all of this. So, Rich, leaders within the fire department are saying their chief needs to resign.
Yeah, this is an absolutely scathing 5-page letter, Nicole, from chiefs, present and former, and they've collectively come forward to say a bunch of things. Number one, her mismanagement of this fire was terrible. Number one, they call out specifically DEI practices that she has favored instead of protecting the city. But I want to read their quotes. There is no doubt among all of us that if you had done things right and prepared the LAFD for an incident of this magnitude, fatalities would have been reduced and property would have been saved. All the preventative systems and mechanisms that we have put into place in the past were non-existent at the Palisades fire. We attribute this to you and your command staff's lack of experience, arrogance, inability to lead and manage the LAFD both in emergency and non-emergency times, and the recent retirement of over 125 senior commanders. They call for her retirement. Now, I spoke with John Knox. He's a 23-year veteran of the LAFD. He refused to take a COVID shot and, along with hundreds of others, was relieved of duty. Here's what he had to say.
I think in describing this, probably the best way I can is a complete and utter lack of leadership.
Knox says the problem goes all the way to the top. This internal LAFD document shows that the mayor's office was asking for an additional $48.8 million in budget cuts this year, which would need them to close 16 fire stations. Knox says that the lack of pre-deployment when the city knew about this looming catastrophe was a failure, that they suspended the testing of hydrants due to the budget cuts, and that the Santa Ynez Reservoir has been sitting empty for nearly a year. There's been a lot of talk about the Santa Ynez Reservoir being offline. If that were online, if that were full of water, would that have made a difference in your opinion?
I would think so. It's 117 million gallons of water, and there's, I believe, 3 or 4 tanks up there also that are 1 million gallons apiece if they pump it, out of the reservoir to those holding tanks. And it's also my understanding that one of those tanks was empty.
Further, even though Governor Newsom says all the reservoirs are up and full, that appears not to be true. The LA Department of Water and Power own data shows that 5 other reservoirs are empty at 0%. Knox lays the blame squarely on severe mismanagement from the top. Take a listen.
The fact that the forest management, brush abatement, dry hydrants, lack of pre-deployment, and budget cuts, those are all issues. The fact that there's no water in the reservoirs, that's an issue. To me, it's complete and utter mismanagement. I don't see any other option in it. And everybody wants to point fingers right now at everyone else, but I think everyone needs to take responsibility for their specific department, and the mayor definitely needs to be held accountable because it's her city. And if she's not managing it appropriately, she should resign.
Okay, you choose to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that always comes at a significant
I last
price.
made a video, and there's a good chance that this is going to be my last video just because of the way that YouTube is. So if you want to keep in touch with me, I put a link in the description. Fire service chief amongst this deputy chief in LAFD that said on some video a while ago, and I'll link it in the description below, that when asked if she is capable of pulling someone's husband out of a fire, her response is, well, he got himself into he found himself in the wrong spot to begin with, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. Again, you can watch the video. It's pretty disgusting and appalling. And right now, because there's a lot going on in LA that's very tragic, and because this video has resurfaced, everybody's shocked about all the DEI in the fire service. And I want to make this video to call out what has been going on in regards to DEI in the fire service for years now. A lot of people are seeing videos like this and hearing about this, and they're shocked to find out that this is what's going on. But it's been going on for years, and it's an ongoing problem. So I have some stuff over here that I'm going to talk about. I have my notes over here of things I want to go over. But it's important to lay the groundwork when talking about this is, what is the job of the fire service? What is the fire department here to do? Now, you'll hear a lot of people in the corporate world talk about the importance of DEI and why we need DEI and how if you're against DEI, that means you're secretly a bigot and all of these types of things. But what's the job of the fire service? The job of the fire service is to do 2 things and 2 things only. Protect life and property. That's it. Full stop. Now, the fire department does that through a variety of different ways. Obviously, the first and foremost is direct suppression, like what you see going on in LA or in any other house fire or car fire. The fire department shows up and puts water on the fire. That's part of the job. Other parts of the job that are protect life and property is code enforcement and building inspections, making sure everything's up to code so that if a fire does break out, it can be mitigated quickly and people are saved and all of that kind of stuff. Education, that's another part of protecting life and property. Going to public events or going to kids' schools and talking about stop, drop, and roll and the importance of smoke detectors and all those types of things. This is all protecting life and property, and there's a variety of ways that we do this, but that's the job, and that's different from corporate America. Now, if you're a proponent of DEI, you will say that it's necessary, but the problem with DEI is that it prioritizes people for jobs and positions based on things other than merit. That's important because in the fire service, your job could get you seriously injured or, God forbid, killed. I think recently Houston, I think there was 3 or 4 guys that got trapped in a flashover. That's really dangerous. If you're doing data entry at IBM, you're not going to get trapped in a flashover. And if you mess up something on a spreadsheet, nobody's going to die or be permanently disabled because of that. So one of the worst places you can introduce ideas about DEI is the fire service or any sort of job where people's lives and safety are at risk. It lowers the standards in general. There are countless numbers of
Right. You want your doctor, someone who has benefited from affirmative action, and some groups, all right, 7 out of 8 of their members depended upon affirmative action to get into medical school, and they have a disproportionate number of malpractice claims. You want DEI influencing who pilots your plane or who serves as an air traffic control expert, right? The Obama administration made affirmative action among air traffic controllers a really big policy.
Of firefighters out there that have reached out to me that have told me about their specific department lowering standards to get more women or to get people that are minorities. In other words, categorizing people based on whether or not they're men or women or the color of their skin. And so they will lower standards to get people that are lower on the hiring list in order to bring them in to raise their numbers up and surpass people that have tested higher or more capable or competent to do the job just because they want to raise their numbers and look good and put on all these DEI initiatives. That's a problem. Not only is that wildly demoralizing, and I'm sure there's legal questions there too about whether or not that's even legal and to what degree. That's a dicey situation. But you're getting people in positions that aren't going to be the best people for when shit hits the fan, for when something goes wrong. And that's a recipe for disaster, and you're seeing that right now. So if you do want to become a firefighter, what do you need to know? The things that matter in the fire service are what I call the 3 C's. You have to be capable, you have to be competent, and you have to have character. And it's important to define terms, and we'll talk about this here again in another second. But what do I mean when I say you have to be capable? I mean you have to be physically and mentally capable of doing the job. If you're not strong enough to pull a pre-connect of 1 3/4 hand line, if you're not physically capable of doing that, you should not have this job. If you're not physically capable of dragging a 200-pound man out of a house, you should not have this job because you are not physically able to do the things that you will inevitably come across. Now, a lot of people out there will say, well, 90%, 80% of fire department run value now is EMS. And that's great, but the job of public safety and the job of firefighters is defined by the extremes, okay? Anybody can go pick grandma up off the floor, make sure she's okay, tuck her back in. Not everybody is going to be able to drag a 250-pound man out of a 500-degree building. That's very different. And you need to be able to do that because that's something that you will likely have to do at some point in your career. Now, also in line with capability is when I also said physically and mentally capable. You're going to see difficult things. You're going to see traumatic things. You're going to see destruction. You're going to see death. You're going to see tragedy and sadness. That's a part of the job. And if you're the person that is very emotionally fragile and will just turn into a puddle of emotional goo and won't be able to continue to do your job after you see something like that, this job is not for you. That's okay. That doesn't make you less than. That doesn't make you bad. That's just a reality of the job. We need strong, resilient people that can handle those things and go back in there and get back in there and continue to do the hard work of helping people. Okay, so that's what I mean when I say capable. Competent speaks for itself. If you're unable, like I said earlier, to pull 250 feet of a pre-connect of 1 3/4 charge hand line, if you don't know what that means, if you're in the fire service, you know what that means. You're not competent at the job. If you're unable to search a building through heavy smoke properly, you're not competent at your job. If when you get on the radio, you freeze up and seize up and become and stutter and stumble all over yourself, you're not competent at your job. That doesn't mean people make mistakes, but if you're not competent, if you're not able to do the basic requisites of the job, you are not competent. And if you're not competent, you shouldn't be in the job, or at least not in the position, and you should have the opportunity to remedy that. But if you can't, or you won't, or you don't remedy that, you shouldn't have the job anymore.
And I'm looking at a Substack by Diana Murray, and she notes, women cannot be firefighters, period. We lack the physical strength. Firefighters wear heavy gear, have to lug heavy equipment under conditions of unbelievable stress. Think combat, and your enemy is Mother Nature, against which you do not win, ever. You can't outthink her, you can't outfight her, you can only alleviate or mitigate. And let's say there is a 1 in a million woman who is actually big enough, fit enough, aggressive enough, and strong enough to be a firefighter with no relaxation of standards. No, she would destroy the team. The mere presence of a female on a team, right, in a team, destroys the intense camaraderie that characterizes a team. You do not want women in combat. It destroys camaraderie. You don't want women as firefighters, and you don't generally want women as cops, all right? Imagine you experience the most intense moments of your day with a woman in your squad car, right? How many marriages are going to survive that, right? You need camaraderie. You need group cohesion, right? You need social trust, and just the presence of one woman on a team is going to severely damage those things.
Imagine an accountant that doesn't know how to add or subtract. You wouldn't go to that accountant or go to a lawyer that doesn't know how to read. People want capable and competent people to do the work for them. They don't care what color they are. They don't care whether they're a man or a woman. When you call 911, you expect that someone is going to show up that's going to be capable of doing the job and competent at doing the job. And then the last part about having a decent career in the fire service is character. Now, when most people talk about character, they think, don't steal, don't hurt people. And I mean those things too. That's important. You don't want to be stealing from people. You shouldn't be in public safety or public service in general if you're going to take advantage of people when they need people. But also the kind of forgotten part of character is don't be that insufferable person in the firehouse. If you're the person that is so highly sensitive that every time someone tells a joke that you don't get, or someone has an inside joke, or somebody comes up with a silly nickname and you're going to be offended and you're going to go pout and you're going to go report it to HR, you are insufferable to be around and you are insufferable to work with. Now, I get it. Of course, there's boundaries with anything, and it's important to have an act in a professional manner in a professional environment with a sense of decency. I'm not saying that that should go out the window, but my God, there's constant stories of people that the littlest, tiniest things get blown into a huge proportion. Don't be that insufferable person that's constantly self-victimizing every chance you get. So, with that in perspective and all that in mind, let's talk about DEI and the problem with it. Now, one of the things I really dislike about DEI is the framing of DEI in general. It speaks in empty platitudes, meaning if you don't know what DEI is, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are the three pillars of DEI. But what DEI proponents rarely ever answer is, what specifically do you mean by diversity? What specifically do you mean by inclusivity? That's important. Because the way it's framed is if you raise your hand and say, hey, wait a minute, what do you mean by this diversity? I don't know if I agree with this whole idea of inclusivity. What do you mean by that? You're immediately castigated as some sort of bigot or something like that for asking a question and just saying like, well, wait a minute, I don't know if I agree with the sentiment that you're saying right now, or I don't know if I'm into the lifestyle that you're into. You do you, but I don't want to have to celebrate it too. So let's talk about the first thing about diversity. First, you'll hear a lot of people in the fire service.
Right. So many of our best firefighters and men in the military were expelled because they refused to get the COVID shot. And I am all for vaccines. I am all for the COVID vaccine. But there is a certain type of ordinary personality that is attracted to service in the Army or service as a firefighter. And that type of ordinary personality is more likely to say no to things that get mandated, such as vaccines. All in all right, I want the benefits of this type of ornery, brave, aggressive personality, even if they don't get the COVID vax.
Experts or fire service leaders, and what do I use those terms loosely, talk about how a fire department needs to reflect the way the community around them looks. And first of all, I couldn't disagree with that argument more. Because as I said before, what nobody cares about when they call 911 is what you look like, or whether you're a man or a woman, or what religion you follow, or what you believe, or what your political beliefs are. What they care about is that you are going to be able to help them in their time of need, period. People care as much about the racial makeup of the fire department as much as they care about the racial makeup of the service department. Nobody cares what color the guy or the girl is that picks up your trash. All they care about is that the trash gets picked up on a regular basis. And it's the same thing with the fire service. Now, there's a lot of activists and people online that will tell you that that's not the truth, but nobody ever calls 911 and thinks, man, I really hope that the person that shows up isn't a black guy or a white guy or a black woman. Nobody cares. What they need to know is that you're going to do the job to the best of your abilities and take care of them. Now, there's this other argument floating around in the fire service leader world where they'll talk about a fire department does better when it looks like the community that they serve. In other words, it's kind of like a soft call for we need to prioritize, we need to hire a certain number of black people or Asian people or Hispanic people or white people based on the demographics of the city that we're in. And I couldn't disagree with that more. First of all, because again, you're prioritizing the hiring of people not based on merit, but based on immutable characteristics, things that they can't control and things that have no bearing on their ability to do the job. But also the fact that saying that means that if you have a large department that has several stations in different districts throughout the city and there's different demographics, that means all of your white firefighters are going to go to the white neighborhoods and your black firefighters are going to go to the black neighborhoods and your Hispanic firefighters are going to go to the Hispanic neighborhoods, because we need to look like the districts and the communities that we serve. And that is a segregated fire service, and that's a bad idea. We don't want a segregated fire service. We got rid of this a long, long time ago. What we need to do is prioritize being capable, competent, and having good character. Regardless of the color of your skin, or whether you're a man or woman, gay, straight, Christian, atheist, it doesn't matter. That's not the point of the job. So that's diversity. Equity. Now, to normal people like you or I, who hear the term equity and don't spend their lives in the safety of the halls of academia, equity and equality, they're kind of 6 in one, half dozen in the other. But proponents of DEI and equity will be the first to tell you that equity is not the same as equality, and the goal should be equity, not equality. When you and I think of equality, we think of, hey, we're going to be hiring, we're going to generate a new list for new firefighters, and everybody is welcome to come take the list. Here's the requirements if you want to work here. We don't care if you're black or white or Hispanic. We don't care what color you are. We don't care whether you're a man or a woman. Here's the requirements to do the job. Come on out. That's equality. Everybody has the opportunity to put their best foot forward and get hired. What equity means is picking and choosing winners based on certain immutable characteristics, chief amongst them the color of your skin and whether you're a man or a woman. And again,
real estate mogul, star of $1 Million Listing LA, the owner of the real estate company, the Altman brothers, Josh Altman. Josh, thanks for being on.
Chris, thanks for having me. I'm getting off of the craziest week of my 20-year career. The phone has not stopped ringing, not in a good way, not the type of business you want to be doing. We have over 1,500 new renters just locally. I'm about 10 minutes away from the Palisades. We got a lot of people in this new market. There's an entire off-market business that's being done right now. No one can find a rental. It's insane. People are trying to make deals with empty houses that were supposed to be for sale. We're in uncharted waters here. Ordinances are changing by the hour, which is good because people are trying to figure out a way to speed the build process to get these people back to normal life. But also at the same time, even somebody like me, I'm learning as we go. If you asked me 2 weeks ago about...
All right, you see the lack of competence in Los Angeles and in California with regard to these fires, and doesn't give you a great deal of confidence. What kind of competent government response will we have when the big earthquake hits?
Price gouging in real estate, I wouldn't even know what you were talking about. And now it's a very big deal here. I'm actually involved in a group of realtors that have this list that people are putting together. There's over 2,000 units just on this list of people who had different prices late December, and now they are higher in January. That's a big issue for multiple different reasons, and it's very obvious. This is not like you can hide this. This is public record. People can look what it was on for a couple weeks ago, and it's a big problem that we're dealing with, and it's really a race to who can get to these leases first and make a deal. And we don't even know what's going to happen at the end of the day.
Well, I get the price pressure of supply and demand in this situation. That was going to happen. But the state made the 10% rule. How are they getting around the 10% rule?
Well, we're going to see what the punishment is, right? Because we don't even know what that is yet. People who have learned about it, like us, for instance, we've had meetings with our brokerage. We can't even take those listings if that's the case. We don't want to be anywhere near them because you're going to get dragged into them on a real estate agent front as well. So it'll be interesting to see. What I'm hearing is if you were on for $10,000 a month, for example, and you raised it to $20,000 a month, that tenant, once they're in that house, I would be very surprised if they're not able to get the entire difference of that $10,000 back if they go out and hire an attorney. There's going to be so much of it. You have to realize we signed $250 million worth of listings in the past week. We usually do that in a month and a half. There's more properties flooding the market, both for sale and for lease. I have 50 friends just personally with houses that I've sold that have lost their houses completely, and they're going to do whatever they need to do to get their family to some type of normalcy. You can't live in a hotel for that long. You got to get back to reality a little bit. I will also tell you, Chris, I walked the Palisades. I walked Malibu. For people watching around the world and seeing this, I'm telling you, it is 100 times worse when you walk those areas. It gives you a stomach ache. You can't even wrap your head around it. Neighborhoods, gone. Think about the Palisades. This was that all-American neighborhood. Families, children running up and down the street. It was like what you see in movies. Gone. But I will tell you what's interesting, Chris. I said when this first happened, maybe 35 to 40% of the people won't go back to the Palisades. I now up my number to 65 to 70% of the people who lived in the Palisades won't go back there. What are they going to do? They're going to be the house that's finished and then live amongst 100 other houses being developed. The kids that are 5 years old, they're going to be 10 years old by the time it's done. They're not going to go to the same school.
Yeah. Listen, Brother Altman, I appreciate you. Thank you for telling us what's happening. Let's stay in touch. And as you go through it and you see who's doing it right and who's doing wrong and why.
It's time to check in with David Lazarus in today's Consumer Confidential.
All right, a lot to get to today. Laz, you talked to a home builder about the monumental task of rebuilding. Yeah. Open it up for us.
And this would be the CEO of Williams Homes, Lance Williams, who has built, he says, over 2,000 homes in dozens of communities here in the Southland. So he knows a thing or two about this. And we went down basically all the things that need to be addressed from the developer's point of view, as opposed to the homeowner or renter view, which we've already looked at. I asked Williams right out of the gate, what should homeowners be focused on right now? Here's what he said.
We found that the first thing that homeowners should do really is get their insurance policies and review them with their agent or someone who's an expert in insurance and get a really good understanding of the coverage in their policy.
That's good advice. You definitely want to talk to your insurer right now and make sure you're not underinsured in light of all these changing market conditions. That said, are there enough contractors to go around? Will there be enough laborers to fully staff the thousands of crews that will come with a project of this magnitude? Here's what Williams said.
We're blessed in LA County with a very deep pool of highly skilled production residential trade contractors. So it will be a challenge, but it's certainly...
Due to immigration, real construction wages haven't increased in 60 years in California. So maybe with increased demand, maybe for the first time in 60 years, we'll see substantial real wage growth for workers.
Only doable to get that done here in LA County.
Yeah, doable, but I think the challenge is going to be the key thing here. And also, where will all these laborers sleep? Where will this army of people, many of whom are going to face possible deportation by the incoming administration, where will they be for the next few years? These are still very open questions. I asked Williams about, okay, what about overages when it comes to building supplies? What about price gouging? What is he seeing from the developer's point of view?
There will be pressure on materials and labor, and we're always concerned about that. That's why it's important not to design a house that's like the house that you lost, or 110% of the house that you lost, so you have a chance to actually be able to pay to.
Right. Fire is not some unstoppable process. It needs ingredients to propagate. And if you employed fire-resistant architecture, if you had defensible open space around your home, right, you're far less likely to have gone up in smoke from these recent fires, right? You want to keep flames and heat away from a home, reduce the likelihood of embers. Embers need fuel, right? They enter your home space, and then they need something that they can latch onto. And so if you've got fire-resistant building materials, if you've got mesh screening on vents and chimneys, if you're closing gaps around exposed rafters, if you're clearing vegetation and debris from a home, right? These are all low-cost things that you can do to significantly reduce your chances of going up in smoke. This is comic Brian Callen.
We had an evacuation order that they sent out by accident to people even down where I'm at.
Yeah, what was that?
It was some guy who fucked up. Because I don't know if you know, this is gonna be shocking. Grab the table.
Wait a minute.
LA's not run very well.
Hold on.
I know. Hold on.
What the fuck are you saying?
Because see, here's the thing. We have to worry about. I know.
Isn't the chief of fire department a lesbian?
Now hold
LA's
on. Let's not
run
turn
amazing.
this into. Listen. Here's the bottom line.
It's run amazing.
It's not about infrastructure. Infrastructure's got to take.
I won't sit here while you disparage the great people
Sir,
that are running Los Angeles.
Sir, infrastructure's got to take a backseat to climate change and social justice and homeless abatement, which hasn't worked.
See, the lady who's responsible for filling the fire hydrants gets paid $750,000 a year.
Hey, your tax dollars going to good work there, everybody.
That's a lot of money.
You think?
That's sitcom
You
money.
think? I said
that's like I'm the star of a sitcom.
Oh, dude,
not star, but like you're the third person.
No,
on a
that's a
sitcom.
high wage, sir. $750,000 for a city employer who's
for someone just like fill that one.
How the
Get the
aquifers?
waters.
How the aquifers today?
Get the water in that one.
You know what? We got to protect the Delta smelt.
Yeah.
Whatever the fuck that is. So we got to. You know.
Trump was talking about that on the podcast. On the podcast I did with him, Trump was going on this long rampage about Los Angeles and the fires and how it all can be prevented and they could have plenty of water. He explained the whole thing, and he's right.
Here's my whole philosophy. You guys know, that we have a tinderbox. And you can say that there are a lot of people that live there. The fires it's always a potential. If that's the case, then please make sure the fire hydrants. We've got to be able to figure it out. You guys in LA, California came up with AI. I mean, the Silicon Valley was pretty innovative people. Let's figure out a way to keep the fucking...
Very different people.
They are very different
people.
people,
That's like saying people in America are homeless and also Elon Musk.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Get some people down in government who are innovative like that. What the fuck are we doing?
They don't want to do that job.
Do you know the City Council of Los Angeles? 4 of the members of the City Council are far-left social democrats. How about that? There's zero pushback on ideas. It's just all
it's all an echo chamber. Well, I'm hoping now that this is a giant wake-up call for these people. I mean, there's no positivity that's going to come out of a horrific fire like that. But at least it'll wake. Because look, that area. Adam Carolla was on someone's show talking about this, and he said something that's like very. I think he was actually doing it himself.
Yeah, about permits.
Yeah. Well, he was just saying that there's 80% of the people that live there are far left. 80% of the people that got their houses burned down from complete total incompetence and a lack of management. Total incompetence. 80% of those people are far left people, and that's a giant wake up call when you realize, like, no, these fucking people, this is not the way to do it. Did you see that lady, the fire lady, who's a part of this whole diversity thing? And they said, "You're a woman firefighter. Can you carry my husband out of a burning building?" She was like, "Well, if your husband's in a burning building, he already made a mistake."
Is that what she said?
What did she say? Big old sassy fat black lady.
Yeah, my favorite was that one of the women said, "You want people to look like you."
Same lady.
And I'm like, "Hey, listen, hey, lady, when my house is on fire and I'm trying to get my kids out, I'm not going to be like, hey, can I get some people that look like me because this doesn't make me feel
safe." I want
safe.
to look like Brian Shaw.
So
I want him to become
so
fucking wall looking like Juggernaut.
Driven snow. If they look like a White Walker and they can get me out of that fucking fire, I'm in. I want Brian Shaw.
To be a giant dude who can carry people
with a mustache that goes like this.
Yeah,
right?
Fucking handlebar.
I love firemen. I'm so gay that when I saw they came by, I saw some firemen and I didn't know what to do. I wanted to say something like, "Go get them, guys," or something like that. And I literally went like this. I saluted them. I went,
"That's good."
It's a little embarrassing.
It's an acknowledgement.
Yeah, but my wife is so funny because my wife is very handy, and I said. And we had an evacuation order. I looked at her and I go, "I got to go do Joe's podcast and then shoot my special at the mothership, but I feel guilty about leaving you here." And she goes, "What are you going to do? You can't change a tire. I got this." I was like, "All right, see you later." So,
yeah, usually men are more mechanically handy than women, but not so much for me, right? I've had a lot of women in my life far more mechanically handy than myself.
Yeah, I don't know. I would have felt weird about leaving them too. Even
well,
though you're in a safe
I'm in an area where
space.
I'm good.
Yeah, you're good for now. Yeah. This is the thing about LA that, there's a viral clip that's going around now of a conversation that I had with Sam Morrell a while back. And we were talking about when I was on Fear Factor, how this fireman told me that this was going to happen one day. Yeah. He said it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
With the right wind, he's like, we won't be able to stop it. Now that's gone viral. And then the Trump thing went viral too, because Trump was saying that they need to do something to change this. They need to clean up the forest, get rid of all the dead wood.
Yeah,
all these things can be done. Get rid of all the brush, get rid of all the dead wood, open up that fucking water from the north to come down. This idea that, do you know that the whole center of California used to be a lake?
No.
A giant lake?
No.
Bro, I found out about it about a year ago.
Really?
It's crazy. Young Jamie? Wait till you see how big this fucking lake was. And all of it, is all meddling and fucking around by humans.
Did I ever tell you the conversation I had with Arnold Schwarzenegger? I was with John Leguizamo.
Did he say, screw your freedom?
No, he didn't.
Screw your freedom.
This was before that. I was doing that movie.
Screw your freedom.
Screw your freedom. He said, so I'm with John Leguizamo. We were doing that movie Ride Along, and John goes, "Hey, stick around. We'll have some dinner with a friend of mine's coming by. I didn't know who it was." Arnold shows up with his assistant. It's kind of cool, and I'm a fan. So we're sitting there, and I had just read a book on California politics by Michael Lewis called Boomerang, about sort of like how a lot of the towns like Stockton went broke because of the pension plans and all that shit. Blah blah blah.
I thought it was the Diaz brothers running around slapping people.
It is that too, dude. It is that too. It's
you find that
too.
lake? Yeah, I was waiting for it. Check this out. Look at the size of this lake. Tulare Lake.
What?
Largest freshwater lake
Where,
west
though?
of the Mississippi.
Largest freshwater lake west of the Mississippi.
What?
It used to be fucking huge. Show a photo of what it used to look like. So it was all agriculture. They fucked it up.
Oh, because they drained it, right?
Look at the size of it.
What the?
Look how big it
What in
was.
the world?
Look how fucking big that
And
is.
now it's just gone.
Gone. Yeah,
God
look
bless
at
him. God bless him, dude. That's when you're really trying. That's when you're trying.
COVID mask on.
That's just a last stand, bro. That's a last stand. That's
No, you should have been out. You got to get out of there. You got to accept it. I've been evacuated 3 times.
Have you really?
Yeah, when I lived in Bell Canyon.
Yeah, I remember
I got evacuated 3 times. You know, it burnt 2 houses in front in 2018. 2 houses in front of my old house were burnt to the ground.
Well, that video I showed you at my friend's house that just disappeared, and then you remember I sent you that video of him driving down the PCH. Those guys are coming to my house because where I'm at is the only place that's
Expert Mauricio Umansky joins me now. Mauricio, California has an insurance crisis, obviously. How are we going to handle it?
Well, Stuart, it's just been an absolute mess. We've been in an insurance crisis now for many, many years. We've had a lot of disasters, and the government's going to have to step up. The state government, the local government. We're going to have to get help from the federal government. I predict that the damage is going to be north of $100 billion. And we're just going to need help from absolutely everybody.
When it comes to rebuilding, how do you rebuild with all the regulations and permitting problems in California? How do you do it?
Well, again, this is going to have to be a process. There's going to be a lot of questions asked right now. I think there's few answers. Obviously, we need to get a hold of the fire. We need to get people into houses, and we need to take care of all of our residents that have lost their homes and have been displaced. You know, even if you haven't lost your home, the likelihood of getting back into your home for a short period of time is very unlikely. We've got to go clean the water. We've got to get power back on, electricity back on. The government's going to have to step up and make permitting easier. Put up a task force that really gets involved in all of these things and help with the rebuilding.
Well, wait a second, Mauricio. Do you really think that the current leadership in California is going to seriously reform the permitting process, seriously reform all the green regulations? The current leadership of the state, I don't think they're going to do it.
Yeah, I hope they do, because that's who we have, and that's what we need, and that's what the residents need, and that's what I need here in the country, in the community. I don't think they're going to do it. They've proven time and time again that they don't have the means to do it, the brain to do it. They just focus on the wrong things. We're one of the largest economies in the world. We're the highest taxed economy in the state in the country, and we're just not doing things right. We haven't proven ourselves to do things right. But the optimism in me is hoping and praying.
All right, a tale of 2 states. All right, both California and Florida have had significant problems with home insurance. Florida fixed its home insurance market with reforms. California did not. California essentially legislated against charging fair prices for home insurance, allowing the free market to charge proper prices commensurate with risk. So in Florida, Republicans headed off an insurance market death spiral caused by litigation abuse. So state law allowed policyholders to assign their claim benefits to contractors working with trial lawyers. Contractors would inflate charges, then sue insurers if they rejecting them, setting up a costly claim-by-claim battle. Insurers lost hundreds of millions of dollars a year. More than a dozen failed between 2020 and 2022. Other insurers left the market because litigation costs made it difficult to obtain reinsurance. Enter Governor Ron DeSantis. He championed tort reforms. So tort is a legal action when somebody hurts you and you go after them. So 2022, 2023, All right, Governor DeSantis stanched the flood of frivolous lawsuits. He stabilized the insurance market. He reduced exposure, and 9 insurers have since entered the market. So 60% of Florida's top 10 carriers have expanded their business in the state. So right now, we federalize the U.S. insurance market, which creates a moral hazard. It discourages state reforms. So rather than protecting California Democrats from the cost of their blunders, Republicans should point to Florida as the way to go. Right? That there are far smarter ways of doing things. Hugh Hewitt, the talk show host, he also for approximately 20 years made his legal specialty land use. He knows of what he speaks.
Out in Southern California. Thank you for joining me today. I got to talk especially to the people of Los Angeles. I'm on KRLA AM 870 The Answer. I'm on KCBQ 1170 The Answer in San Diego. I talk to a lot of California every day, but this one is specifically for you and for everyone with friends and family. We are now seeing a disaster on top of a disaster. And the disaster this time is the government in California. The city, the state. County's doing okay. Sheriff Luna, Chairwoman Barger, they're doing okay. In fact, Sheriff Luna's doing very well. And the county DA, Nathan Hoffman, is very good. He knows what he's doing. We have endless press conference after endless press conference out here. And while there is endless respect and thanks for the courageous firefighters and police, the frustration level is going off the top of the roof with Gavin Newsom, Karen Bass, and everybody else. Because here's the situation. We know what is burned and what hasn't burned. There's a giant evacuation area. More than 88,000 people have been evacuated. I think it's probably more like 130,000 when you add in children. And they won't let people back into homes that did not burn down thanks to the bravery and around-the-clock efforts of the fire and the policemen. And I understand why originally they were hesitant. Yesterday were Santa Ana's, and they were afraid of embers and hot spots. Well, if I hear the word ember and hot spot again, I'm just going to throw a shoe at the TV. I have evacuees, and they're great house guests. They're old friends. They're dear friends. All they want to do is go back to their house, for which there is no power. They don't want to stay there. Get their clothes, some meds, get the food out of the refrigerator before it destroys the refrigerator, because if you leave food in refrigerators too long that have no power, it ruins the refrigerator, another insurance claim to make. All they want to do is visit their home for a couple of hours. Now, we have beautiful conditions, an ocean breeze, and rising humidity. There is no threat right now. There's not a Santa Ana threat until Monday or Tuesday of next week. And yet, the only bit of news they got this morning before I left the broadcast was, you will be out of your houses for at least a week. No explanation. Oh, it's too dangerous. Now, I understand roping off the burned out areas because there's a lot of hazmat issues. That's legit. They got to make sure that nothing's going to blow. They got to make sure there's no noxious gases. They don't want looters in there. But there are thousands of houses that were untouched. And we are a free people. And those houses belong to a free people. I believe actually the city of Los Angeles right now is committing a taking, a Fifth Amendment prohibited taking. Now, there are some contrary case law having to do with public safety. But these dummies do not know that they could easily say this, dear evacuees, if your home didn't burn down and you're sure of it, you may approach your home, show ID, be prepared to prove that it's your home. And you may go in beginning Saturday morning at 7 a.m., but you got to be out by Sunday at 3. You can stay overnight if you want. There's no power, and we're not going to turn the power back on. I understand that. They understand that. You can't drink the water. They understand that. I understand that because there's a lot of ash. They're flushing the system. They get that. But they want to go to their houses, and they're not allowed to go to their houses. And there are, whatever hope Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom had of recovering from their political suicide of neglecting to prepare for the fire is vanishing as frustration turns into anger. And I see it firsthand. My house guests are wonderful people. They have lived in their house for 40 years, 50 years, and they're very grateful. It was a white house. It's probably a pink house now because of all the fire retardant that dropped. They're very grateful that it didn't burn down, and they are up on Mandeville Canyon. But there's no reason in the world other than CYA. You know what's going on here is the same thing that happened after COVID. You give authoritarians a little opening, and they will take it and run with it and shut everything down. They don't know what to do. They are afraid mostly of being embarrassed again. They are afraid mostly of seeing a second house burned down. So they are over protecting what they underprotected. Classic reaction, but they like it. They like it. They love saying you can't do this, you can't do that, and then they rattle off acronyms. And the worst part of it, are the endless serial press conferences. Let me introduce Joe Bag of Donuts. Let me introduce Jane Bag of Donuts. Let me introduce any kind of bag of donuts you want to name. We get like 30 people. They don't know how to communicate.
So the movie director David Lynch died yesterday, and a friend of mine was a producer on David Lynch films. And so I was invited, I think, to David Lynch's 58th birthday party, and every major celebrity in Los Angeles showed up. I mean, the actors, the movie industry absolutely adores David Lynch. And even then, he was suffering from emphysema. So when people make a case against cigarette smoking, it's not so much that you'll die early, but the last 20 years of David Lynch's life were handicapped by his emphysema. I think Mulholland Drive was the last significant movie that he directed. He didn't really accomplish much in his last 20 years of life, and he was robbed by his emphysema. And I remember at this David Lynch birthday party, I was introduced to the woman who was Miss World and one of the stars of Mulholland Drive. And my friend was trying to encourage me to date her. And I just felt completely outclassed and I felt insecure. So this big-time movie producer who was also a conservative, he took Rachmanis, he took compassion on me, and he just started up the conversations with me. And so when I'd gone to interview him, he didn't turn out to want to talk about his career as a producer, and so he would just turn it around on me, and he ended up interviewing me. But there are some conservatives in Hollywood, and there's like a secret handshake so that we get to know each other. And it's a beautiful thing, having that strong in-group identity. And it gives you something of an esprit de corps when you're just a tiny, embattled minority within a dominant group that tends to hate conservatives. Another good thing about living in Los Angeles is people don't bother celebrities. They don't go up to them usually and ask them for autographs or get in their way. That people give them space and don't go crazy over them.
Communicate either. Now, I'm a professional. I've been doing this since 1990. If you are going to give a phone number, Madam Mayor, Mr. Governor, give it at least 3 times and slowly. If you want people to go to rescue lacounty.gov, then you say, I can't remember what it is. It's not up to me to know what it is. I think it's not rescue, it's recovery.lacounty.gov. I don't know what it is because they said it too fast, because they didn't repeat the number again and again and again, because I've got 100 different people who get up there and say things that do not matter, either to the people who have lost everything or to the people who haven't lost anything except time and some insurance claims who want to get into their house. There are 2 kinds of people now. There are evacuees.
When I talk about feeling outclassed or insecure when mixing with these A-list Hollywood celebrities, it's my black friends who go, what's the matter? You're a great guy. They do more pep talks than any other group of which I'm a no. I know the only people who've ever said, oh, you look like James Bond, they were black guys. And so there do seem to be significant self-esteem differences between various groups that, in my experience, people from Africa have the most self-esteem. People from Northern Europe and Northern Asia tend to have the least. But the self-confidence and the extroverted, outgoing, spontaneous natures of my black friends, it awes me. I'm so much more insecure and socially retarded and emotionally constipated compared to them. Your experience of life shows consistent patterns that different groups have different gifts. If you live in an apartment building, all right, the black people who are there are more likely to be outgoing, extroverted, spontaneous, to be more social, to hold more gatherings, to speak more in a less stilted, more frank manner than other groups. And the people from Japan, Asia, Korea originally, they tend to be the most careful, the most quiet. They tend to hold the fewest loud parties. They tend to be the least extroverted, the least spontaneous. They tend to be the most cautious. And it's not so much that there's some great significance in it of itself to the pigmentation, but for many people, their life experience indicates that skin pigmentation and, say, religious symbols and the way people dress, that these stereotypes offer deeper cues about the different gifts of different groups.
To have a place to go home to eventually, and there are people who've lost everything. The people who have lost everything are Category A. They need FEMA, they need loans, they need help, they need housing, they need the government. And there is a regional center, and I don't know if it's working at all. And then there are people who have homes that they can't get to, despite the fact it's a free country, and there is no risk right now, none, in those areas.
So I remember I was out dancing one night, flamenco dancing, and I'm just a terrible, terrible dancer. And I was seated next to Robert Duvall, and I started telling, oh, I really loved your movie, The Apostle. And like that, don't do that, right? When you see a celebrity, don't tell him how much you admire him in this or that movie or TV show. But if you talk about books or talk about current events, you talk about anything else, right? Many celebrities are completely open, and you can carry on great conversations. But probably avoid the hot button topic of religion, belief in God. I made that mistake with some celebrities to start talking about God. Avoid the most controversial political issues, but don't praise them for their work, because that immediately places you in the fan category, and they just want to hold you at arm's length. But if you just talk to them like you would anybody else, something that's not too controversial, they are more at ease with that, right? But you're seated next to a celebrity, whether when I was working as an extra on movies and TV shows, or out dancing, or at some kind of social gathering, don't start praising them for their work, right? It just shuts off conversation. Otherwise, right, they're about as open as anyone else to a conversation. I remember talking to the first major female movie producer. I think her name was Masha Nassiter. And I asked her, if someone doesn't want to see Brokeback Mountain because they don't want to see a movie about gays, does that mean they're homophobic? She said, yes, definitely.
Areas. So if you know it, Nathan, I know you. I've introduced you. You're a good district attorney. You know this is not legal to bar people from their homes except by the most extraordinary emergency. This is the same thing we saw in COVID. The overreaction of authoritarians who do not know what to do, so they just shut everything down without regard to the opportunity cost. There are other costs involved for those evacuees. The stress, the inability to get to their clothes and their meds. Some people had pets that were left behind that they need to check on. The fire department's doing the best they can. I am not mad at the fire department or the police department. They're doing what they are told. Karen Bass has demonstrated she is not up to this job. She should have resigned. Gavin Newsom, yesterday, he signed a law saying you can't sell your property to anyone because it might be.
So there is a whole bunch of widespread complaints that Hollywood is somehow some incredibly closed industry. To me, it was amazing how open it was, how you could get into intense, meaningful conversations with very powerful people. And when I was a kid and I would send off requests to various sportscasters, I was shocked how many wrote me back. Joe Starkey on KGO radio in San Francisco, he was their sports reporter for something like 40 years. He wrote me back a long, thoughtful postcard. Others would write me back a page or two with tips on how to move into the sportscasting game. And Mike Adamle, who was a co-host with Bryant Gumbel of an NFL pregame show, he spent like 40 minutes with me at SeaWorld just talking about the world of sports broadcasting. I was just a kid in 8th grade, and a lot of adults would tell me from about 8th grade on, like, this kid knows more about sports than any other kid I know, because my primary knowledge of sports would be from reading. So I went through all the back issues of Time Magazine, Newsweek, Life, and Sports Illustrated from their inception up to the present. That's how I would spend my summers at the Pacific Union College Library, and then I'd read all these books. So for most people, most kids, their knowledge of sports was just the games that they'd seen. But I'd read so many books that the adults enjoyed talking to me.
Be a insufficient offer. People taking advantage of that. As Tim Sandifer of the Goldwater Institute said, you help no one by forbidding them from selling their property. They may want to sell their property so they can get the hell out of California. Maybe not. But it's not up to the state of California. That's a taking, too. I teach con law, and I'm telling you, I don't know who's calling the shots on this stuff. But you got to be aware. You're all going to get sued under Section 1983 because you're depriving people of their constitutional right to their property under color of state law. And I hope they name you personally. And I know Stephen Larson and his gang, Larson LLP.
So Paul Fishbein, the publisher of Adult Video News, he would call normies, but particularly also celebrities, who would sniff around the porn industry to get a sense of the errors there. He'd call them sniffers. And so there are quite a few celebrities who were quite in touch with the porn industry. So Tommy Lasorda, the former manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, was friends with John Doe, would call up the male porn actor John Doe. John Doe was particularly intelligent, thoughtful, introspective male porn star. And I had some great conversations with him. Then one day he ups and commits suicide. Who are the other celebrities that come to mind? But yeah, a lot of people in Hollywood would just kind of sniff around the porn industry.
That was my last law firm after we broke away from Aaron Fox. And I retired in 2016. I got no investment in the lawsuit. There are a gazillion lawyers filing lawsuits against Southern California Edison and everybody else who can be named. But right now, there are damages accruing because of Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass.
Oh, so a lot of people in Hollywood would invite porn stars to come audition for their program so that they could have sex with them, and would not usually end up casting them.
Lots and lots of damages accruing.
And many of the porn stars were quite willing to go to bed with people in Hollywood for the chance of moving ahead in that career. It really worked out, though.
And their defense is going to be public safety. There is no threat right now. So I want to repeat again. Here's what you do. You say, evacuees, check this map, and you give the phone number and the URL.
Oh, and there were a lot of people who would work both in Hollywood and in porn behind the scenes. So they would use a fake name. But many of the videographers, many of the editors would work in both businesses.
You don't read URL, Karen Bass. You actually give the address. And it's lacounty.gov, and I think it's recovery.lacounty.gov. And here's the map. If your home has not been burned down, you may go to it beginning 7 a.m. on Saturday, but you got to be out by Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. Why? We're going to have a Santa event. And I understand firefighters are worried about the 1 to 5% chance that an ember.
So when you daven every morning at a synagogue, there are often beggars who come around. And as soon as you come to a synagogue, you ask people for money, you're immediately slotted into the beggar slot. You'll never become friends with anyone at that synagogue, all right? So there are certain behaviors that immediately give you away. Either you're a fan, you're a beggar, and this is why sane people are cautious in what they reveal in their opening interactions, because we're all hardwired to say no and to just dismiss people. So people tend to be careful in the first things that they disclose so that you don't trigger that automatic dismissal that just seems to be wired into us. We're just walking around looking for reasons to dismiss people.
Ember might float somewhere. They got 3,000 firefighters in Los Angeles right now. And that's good. They should have been here last Monday, but they're here now. That's good. We got resources everywhere. They're all staged up in Beaumont, which is great because they can get there in the air in a hurry. But there is no threat, none, zero, of a fire right now. There are lots of places people could go home. There's no electricity, no water. It's their choice. It's their life. You don't know the costs that you're imposing on people. You don't know the computers they left behind. You don't know all the passports they left behind. They got to get their stuff. Are you people so dense? Now, there is a convenience factor. They don't want to be bothered by these people. You know, they don't want to deal with the traffic. Listen, you work for them. Start thinking about them. Karen Bass, Gavin Newsom, 88,000 people want to go home if only for a couple of hours. Make them show ID, keep the police there, don't let looters in, check them, the line might be long. It's up to them. We are a free people. We do not live under the rule of Karen Bass.
Right, Michael Shellenberger, I share most of his sentiments. It's just he's so shoddy. Right, I really want to support him because I essentially agree with him about almost everything. My problem is he's just so careless, slipshod.
Conventional story is right now. The conventional story is Los Angeles is a fiery place. They did their best. There was nothing really more that could have been done, that this was inevitable, that there's fires all the time. Climate change is causing these fires. that Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Bass responded decisively and they did everything they could, and that the state was as prepared as possible, and these accidents happened. That's the main story right now. Everything about it is a lie. Nothing about that story is true at all. In fact, it's much worse than anybody realizes at this point. In fact, the story is much bigger than people realize. So let's unpack it. I mean, this story starts on January 2nd. On that day, the National Weather Service.
So the problem is the people who are the most rigorous journalists, the people who care the most about facts, tend to be on the left. And Michael Shellenberger's heart, I think, is in the right direction. But unfortunately, it's mainly those who are shoddy with their fact-checking who are making these contrarian conservative arguments.
Service issued a very strong fire warning to underscore.
Okay, this is important. So days before the fire started, I heard, and everyone else who followed local news heard, that we were going to have Santa Ana winds that would be the most severe of any since 2012. So the most severe in 12 years, that's what we were expecting. And so there was considerable advanced warning. Also, we knew that we had about the driest rainy season in Southern California history.
For the point, then National Weather Service Los Angeles held a press briefing the following day on January 3rd. On January 4th, Mayor Karen Bass flew to Ghana in the midst of very serious warnings. Why was she going to Ghana? Well, first of all, keep in mind, she had promised not to travel abroad if she were elected mayor, and she's now traveled abroad 6 times. This was a completely vanity junket to rub shoulders with the next president of Ghana. How does that help LA at all?
Does she have like family lineage in Ghana? What's the Ghana connection?
Well,
why Ghana?
Question.
Why not Nigeria or Australia?
I mean, look, she says she loves going to Africa. I love going to Africa. But you're trying to run like a pretty complicated city in Los Angeles. I mean, keep in mind, a lot of people forget, but there's Los Angeles City and it's inside Los Angeles County, and there's 88 cities inside Los Angeles County. So you're running just a huge complicated city. But that's the context, is that she leaves town at the moment that she needed to not only stay, but she needed to start to mobilize against the fires. When they got that warning, everybody that knows anything knows that the fires are inevitable, because all they needed was an ignition, and they would be very difficult to put out. So what should have happened is that Governor Gavin Newsom should have immediately called out the National Guard. Mayor Bass should have mobilized fire trucks to be in strategic.
So Gavin Newsom was several days late in calling out the National Guard, but it's not Mayor Bass's call on mobilizing fire trucks. That's the Los Angeles Fire Department's decision. So this is the kind of shoddy reasoning that Michael Shellenberger employs.
Places that we knew were high-risk neighborhoods, just position them there. Just leave them there, wait there, have crews there, just ready to go. They should have had C-130 retrofitted military planes with water or flame retardant just circling, getting ready to just put out any fire as soon as it starts. What about climate change? There is no evidence that this was caused by climate change. Climate change is happening. I think it's real. I think humans are causing a big part of it. But it's not like we don't ever have Santa Ana winds in January. That has happened before. And John, there is zero change to precipitation, to rainfall in the Los Angeles basin. Trucks and firefighters and help to fight these fires. They call it mutual aid. It's actually it's a lovely system, but it's not super efficient. It's not hierarchical. You can't demand it. Then once they get all the agreement, then they all meet somewhere. The fire trucks do. They get on the same radio channel. They develop an attack plan, and then they wind their way up. I mean, anybody that knows Los Angeles or Pacific Palisades knows you can wind yourself up these really windy roads. I mean, it's just too late at that point. The fires are raging. The other thing is that it came out, and by the way, all this is happening against the backdrop of both Gavin Newsom and Mayor Bass just saying we did everything we could, everything was fine. Of course, nothing to see here.
Right. There's always the amazing shock and dismay by Newsom.
So I can't see that many obvious mistakes that Gavin Newsom made with regard to these fires, aside from being late calling up the the National Guard, right? This is primarily a Los Angeles governance issue. It's not primarily a California governance issue. It's the Los Angeles Fire Department that's responsible for combating these blazes.
About who's I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
Yes.
I'm going to ask for accountability. And then there's like the apologies of, I admit that there's always more we could have done. But that we've played that back like 4 times now.
Oh, sure.
'Cause it was like 2018 was that
sure.
Paradise.
Paradise Fire,
California Fire, and then there was,
fires,
and then we saw another in 2020. It's like, isn't this like table stakes of governance of the state of California?
It's existential, right? I mean, it's you can't function as a society if you don't have aggressive fire protection. I mean, one of the greatest Babylon Bee headlines of all times is, Gavin Newsom demands to know who's in charge of things around here. So I mean, he's somebody that has, just kind of floated to the top, not taking responsibility. I mean, he's really a symbol of the irresponsibility of the city and of the state, I should say. I mean, one of the most egregious things, the firefighters ran out of water.
Right.
And then there's a lot of excuse making. Oh, there's nothing you could do. The water pressure fell. It was just inevitable. It was just, this was just something that had to happen. It couldn't have been that there was any, thing we could have done about it. Well, it turns out that there was a massive reservoir, the second largest water reservoir serving Los Angeles, right next to the Palisades fire. It was thousands of feet away. It's called the Santa Ynez Reservoir. I had another whistleblower who works at a major utility in California, major water utility, who just said, these people get in touch with me because they're so upset. And they just said, this is just absolutely inexcusable.
Right. If you're concerned about climate change and pollution, you'd think that you'd make a priority combating fires. And the chat says, all that smoke and burning plastic and other pollutants canceled out all of California's climate change initiatives over the years.
Just to unpack the story a little bit, the clean water reservoirs, because the fire hydrant water is the same as the drinking water, and the reservoirs, it's been a rule for several decades that you have to cover them so that the bird poop doesn't contaminate the water. Well,
because it's mixed into the same plumbing system?
It's the exact same system. Yeah, the water in the fire hydrant you can drink. It's
okay.
The same drinking water, and the reason for it is that it would be, because you could be like, well, we can use the gray water, like the wastewater, to put out fires, and the answer is just that you'd have to have a whole separate piping system, and it's just too inefficient. So this is the way the system works. It basically works that way everywhere in the world. But the reservoir, apparently there was a tear in the cover over that reservoir, so they needed to repair it, but you would never drain that reservoir at any moment that you possibly needed that water for putting out fires. Now you would say, well, if the cover is ripped and there's a chance of contamination, then you certainly can't use that water anymore for the drinking water. And that's fine. You don't need to use it. You can cut it off and you can just keep the water there in case of emergency. It's non-potable water. You're not going to have people drink.
So I'm looking at an ad right now on Fox, urgent care kit, right? This is the type of nonsense and type of scam that funds right-wing media and has been funding right-wing media for many, many years. I mean, Peter McCullough, the anti-vax doctor, oh my God, he's promoting the wellness company. This is major advertiser on Dennis Prager's show. The scams that fund right-wing media, it tells you something about the gullible nature of the audience for a lot of right-wing media. That it explains why so much of the content is moronic.
But in case of an emergency, it's 117 million gallons of water. It would have maintained the pressure. It was very high up, so it was above ground.
Right, so it's pressurizing the plumbing system.
Yeah, it's intuitive, right? Like it is hard to pump the water uphill. But that's why they have the reservoir up high like that. Both the LA County Fire Department and the LA City Department say that they were never notified that the reservoir was empty. That is, I mean, there are so many failures, like all catastrophes. There's multiple failures along the line, and one big failure, which is the failure of governance. If you have a good government, if you have a head of the state, if you have the head of the city that are just running drills, running emergency preparedness, constantly checking every single node in that system to make sure that it runs well, to have, drills, and frankly, drill the population. And California is a beautiful state. We pay a huge amount in taxes in order to live there. We all know that there are things that we have to do to live in such a beautiful place, because it is more dangerous in the ways it's set up in Friday ways. The earthquake proofing, the fire proofing, the flood, all of it, we have to be on top of. But we've got leaders that we're not doing that. We get into why that is, but ultimately, you look at a failure of prevention and of rapid early response before the fires. You look at the failure of the reservoir. Those are two big factors that, had you solved for those, then I think the fire would not nearly have been as bad as it was.
So I want to push in on a couple of those issues as a layman. to try to make sure I'm giving the leadership its due. So the question of the running out of water and the fire hydrants. Now, I understand that maybe the answer is that reservoir, had that reservoir not been emptied, there wouldn't have been a problem. But every system has a failure at peak load one way or another, right? It's like, is it possible that there really was, that this is just, it's such an extreme circumstance that there really was almost no a way to overcome the peak load problem? Is there any legitimacy in that sort of excuse?
It's a reasonable question. And, I think the thing you have to keep in mind, though, is so for example, if you say, if all the reservoirs had been full and they had still run out of water, that's still not the end of the story, because then you have to ask, well, didn't the planning and preparedness show that there was a risk of running out of water, and did we need to build another reservoir? So in other words, the way you look at this, and I think this is the right approach as a journalist, as an investigator, which is the same mentality as the people that will do the proper investigation, ostensibly will be an independent group or person, is that every time somebody goes, oh, well, because of that, then you go, well, why was that? So you just keep going up the chain. It's not, there is some complexity around the water engineering, and you have to calculate, because it is like you were saying, it's like, it's hard to push the water. You have to have a lot of water to push it uphill. You do have to have some pumps. But again, here was a case of a reservoir that was uphill. But either way,
And the chat says, I'm starting to look like a hippie. Time for a trip to a barber. Well, I just slicked it back with some mousse, bro. So when my hair starts to grow out, I just slick it back for a few months. I shave all my hair off about twice a year. And back to the regularly scheduled program.
We're going to have a proper analysis of it eventually, but we know that there was two big failures. One of them with the reservoir being empty, the second with not having mobilized the fire engine and the firefighters in advance. And, look, it's all, I guess the other backdrop to this is that it came out right away that the mayor had cut the fire budget by $17.5 million. Comes out right away, the media, to get a sense of how subservient it is, they started running stories like, I think the headline in the LA Times was, people say that did the mayor cut the fire budget? It's complicated. And you're going to read the story and you go,
this is the fake mea culpa we get now. It's complicated is yes, but we can't say that without looking.
Well, we know definitively that Los Angeles has about the most understaffed fire department among America's biggest cities, with the exception of San Diego. Yeah, how does Fox pay Pete Hegseth $2.3 million a year with ads like that? Sean Hannity $25 million, because there are a lot of rubes who tune into Fox and to right-wing news media. Now, most of these homes that are burned down are in the higher end of real estate. So you have thousands of affluent, frequently powerful, particularly competent people who have been dispossessed by these fires. And so rich, successful, competent people punch above their weight in political influence. So I think we will have substantial political change in California as a result of these fires. Doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have more Republican politicians, but there are plenty of competent people who could run for public office as Democrats. And so I would expect we'll have a lot less emphasis on diversity and trendy left-wing causes, and a lot more emphasis on competence, efficiency, expertise, public safety in California politics going forward. Horty does a home gel treatment. The Gavin Newsom trick. Maybe he has more in common with preppers than he realized. Well, now there are a bunch of liberal preppers. I read about this in the New Yorker with Donald Trump about to take office. There are quite a few people on the left who believe that this signals the end of the world, and they are prepping for catastrophe. So what kind of people are obsessed with the apocalypse? Right? It's usually people who are somewhat out of touch with reality and have a disproportionate need to feel far more important than they really are. Because if it's true that apocalypse is right around the corner, then you are in touch with the single most important news that's going on right now. So it's usually a tell about someone if they're talking about apocalypse. It's a tell that they have some psychological need to sign on to some theory, usually some variation on a conspiracy theory that makes them very important. Because if you're right that this is the end of the world, then you're right about the most important thing going on right now. So Dennis Prager talks about, we're in a civil war right now in America, right? I'm looking out at sunshine, palm trees. I don't see a civil war, but wow, Dennis Prager sees a civil war. So that for Rubes makes him much more important than he would be just on a flat empirical basis, because my God, he sees that we are on the road to totalitarianism. And so usually it's a tell that someone is making a dramatic reach for a feeling of importance, and they need to shore up their life with something that is exciting. So reality is not enough for someone who's just obsessed with the apocalypse and obsessed with prepping, right? It's just a symbol, but it's a symbol of a broken psyche that needs an exciting story to help them to feel important and to give them the sense that they read reality much more clearly than anyone else, that they're in touch with the most important story going on right now. And I was talking to a bloke who said, I've been listening to your show, and when you discussed essentially living alone, yearning for an apocalypse, yearning for some cleansing civil war that would just take away all the trash, and I just put my life on hold, I recognized that you were speaking to me, and once I accepted the truth of what you're saying, I've lost 40 pounds, I've traveled the world, I've got a fiance, right? I've started up a successful business. So when you recognize that you're hiding from reality and that you're feeding yourself these bogus stories to give yourself the strength to carry on, then, that can be a wake-up call that perhaps I need to rethink things.
So one of the things, thinking back to, there's these interest groups, and the fire departments, in a certain sense, are also an interest group. They have their unionized workers. The fire unions are always asking for more money and benefits. And obviously we want them to be doing their job and be ready to do the job. And we're talking as if there's sort of no top level, there's no amount of money that they can't be spent on fire in California. Maybe that's even true. To what extent is there, shenanigans going on here between the fire department and the city and, union negotiations?
So another sign that somebody's priorities are way off is if they're obsessed with problems in the United States, right? The U.S. has problems, but overall, one's attitude towards the United States government should be gratitude for providing a free, prosperous, and safe nation state with just tremendous opportunities all around us. And so without that appropriate sense of gratitude, right, one will get a distorted perspective on life, right? Gratitude helps to clue one into reality, right? Reflecting on people who've loved you, reflecting on the opportunities in the world around you, that's a healthy way to get back to reality, rather than imagining that everything everywhere else is just so much better, like this lady.
Please stay for this, because I've reached the part in this whole class consciousness part where I'm just filled with the most impotent rage, and
So she doesn't want to express the rage at herself. So she expresses the rage at the U.S. government, right? If you are obsessed with everything wrong with American governance, all right, you're probably displacing rage that you don't want to face, that you have against yourself and your own decisions, and you can't face that. So you just displace it onto the United States.
I'm talking that white hot, I need to sink my teeth into something and scream kind of rage. Because what do you mean? That it never had to be this hard for us? What do you mean?
All right, this woman has it easier than 98% of people alive in the world today. She has it easier than 99% of people who have ever lived.
In other countries, they don't have to spend 20% of their paycheck on groceries. What do you mean in other countries, everyone can own homes because they're not paying $2,000 a month in rent?
There's no other country where everybody can own a home. Overall, right, you get more bang for your buck, right? The American wage goes further in terms of what you can buy in the United States in most things. not real estate, not healthcare, not college, but in most things than anywhere else in the world.
Or that their mortgages aren't like their entire paycheck. What do you mean? That people in China work one job and they don't even work 40 hours and they can easily afford their life? And then I'm over here working 60 hours a week, just me as a single parent, to like barely make ends meet, and I'm penny pinching every single second, and like there's so much of life that my kid misses out on and that I miss out on because of money and like work.
You might have made some bad decisions and you might have some kind of under-earning addiction. If your life is unmanageable, the most likely explanation is that you have some out-of-control addiction operating in your life.
Work and no social support net? And you mean to tell me that it didn't have to be like this? They keep us in these chains on purpose, and it never had to be like this. Like,
in all likelihood, the chains that she's referring to are self-imposed chains that she has unconsciously wrapped around herself.
I did everything right. I went to college. I had to drop out of college to take care of my mom when she was sick because, again, no social services, like no safety nets.
So if I ran into some significant problem, let's say I was hospitalized or I needed a great doctor, great lawyer, a great accountant, a great specialist in some area, I would turn, first of all, to my religious community, and I would turn second to my family, and I would turn to my friends.
My dad worked his whole life and died and left everything to my mom. My mom was disabled, and she lived on credit, and like she barely made ends meet, and she did everything she was supposed to, and I did everything I was supposed to, and it just keeps getting worse. It was never supposed to be like this, and I'm so angry.
Where is the father of your baby? What do you mean you did everything right?
That it is. Because what do you mean? I've spent so much of my life working.
So men think women are crazy because women have more negative emotions in general than men do. They have more fear and anxiety, and they have evolved that way, right? They have these tendencies because these tendencies have helped them to survive and to pass on their genes over generations, because men can just have sex and don't necessarily need to stick around to raise the offspring. So women are right to have tremendous fear and anxiety about who they go to bed with and who they build a home with.
So hard to scrape by. And it never had to be like that. My suffering was at the expense of someone else becoming wealthy because they could. And I am so angry about this.
All right, so easy to get angry at the United States and our economic and political system rather than to get angry at yourself. And it's much more useful not to be angry at either, to accept that you've made some bad decisions, because even though you did the best you could at the time with the tools that you had, where we are in life right now is a result of our past choices.
It can't stay like this.
Hold on, help is on the way. Come on, man.
So I downloaded RedNote, and I am no longer convinced that we are living in a first world country. Seeing the everyday lives of Chinese people, like obviously certain Chinese people, I'm not saying everybody's lives, but it's just...
I'm not aware of China having a big illegal immigration problem. People just desperate to get into China for that high quality of Chinese life.
It's like insanely eye-opening. There's something really remarkable that I have noticed about most of these Chinese people, even older people, like people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, they look so much less traumatized than most Americans. Our citizens here are not only like really cold and mean and disconnected and combative, but like you can just see people's problems on their face. You can see that they are exhausted and that they've been brutalized. Now, I don't fully understand Chinese culture at all, and I'm sure it varies a lot. It's a very, very big place, but it's interesting seeing how lighthearted and kind and
What became unraveled?
these people are, especially in comparison to Americans. We just have so much dark energy plaguing this country and plaguing the people, and it's just like, I don't know if we'll ever genuinely know what is happening, like what's happening with our government versus other governments. Is everyone lying to their people? Like, we live in so many layers of deception. Like,
yeah, people don't always say what they mean. They don't usually mean what they say, and that's true for you too. But your problems are not primarily because of the government or forces outside yourself.
I don't know if we'll ever actually know what's happening.
Yeah,
Listen,
we'll never know
I didn't
everything.
think that the culture shock of joining Red Note would be watching grocery hauls. Chinese grocery hauls are insane because they can actually afford food. You guys, what one woman, it would have cost me, oh my God. This is so sad. America is, I already knew, but it's like so sad. We're such a sad excuse for our country.
抖音
Yeah, there are some ways that the United States is a sad excuse for a country, and there are other ways where it's magnificent, and there are other ways that it's in between. And I'm so grateful to Kip, because Kip, like Ricardo, is a constant source of inspiration for me. Kip and Ricardo are the peers, P-I-E-R-S, that I push off against. I need them to shove off against. Now, after the Sacklers, the manufacturers of OxyContin, I'm thinking, who else has destroyed as many lives as Joe Francis and Girls Gone Wild? One woman who was captured by Girls Gone Wild, she confessed to her father what happened, and he died of a heart attack. Right? He died of a heart attack when she told him what happened. I would expect that there would be hundreds of women whose lives were destroyed by Joe Francis and Girls Gone Wild. Now, they bear substantial responsibility for their own terrible choices, but it's kind of amazing that as a society, no one has ever gone after pornographers in a manner that I won't describe, but which you can imagine. In a different society at a different time, right, anyone who specialized in pornography and in seducing women into appearing in pornography against their own interests, you would think that there would be a very heavy penalty paid, right? Why hasn't any angry father exacted retribution? So those who choose to make sex work their primary mode of making a living, that's one degree of degeneracy and degradation. But those women who are just out on the town having a party, and while drunk, they consent and end up performing in a hardcore sex scene in a Girls Gone Wild bus that is then captured and sold, right? Just think of the enormous amount of personal destruction as a result of this Girls Gone Wild operation. There is a 3-part documentary series on Joe Francis on the Peacock channel.
You did get the sense that he wanted proximity to fame and to glamour.
I would actually like to invite you guys out with us tonight, and you'll see what happens.
A lot of people said that he was trying.
So there was a different ethos with regard to sex in the 80s and the 90s and up until the Me Too era. And I think in many ways our culture right now is much healthier. So it used to just be any type of consent, and you just go for it. And we just had a much more predatory sexual culture prior to the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement has its excesses, but overall, I think we're in a healthier space than we were during the more libertine times of the 80s, 90s, the aughts. I don't recall meeting Joe Francis or interviewing him, but I was slightly acquainted with Claire Hoffman, a journalist at the Los Angeles Times. She was the most attractive female journalist at the LA Times. And at age 28, she wrote a profile of Joe Francis that got more hits than any other story published by the LA Times. And she details how he assaulted her. He has such a long track record of bashing people. And he's just left so much destruction in his wake. It's horrifying. And it's a reason to give thanks that we live in a healthier era where an operation like Girls Gone Wild would be much less socially acceptable now. Back in the aughts, right, celebrities were happy to associate with Joe Francis, Kim Kardashian. Brad Pitt would wear a Girls Gone Wild baseball hat.
Trying to manufacture his celebrity, and in fact, he was.
Joe Francis is the 29-year-old mastermind behind the extremely popular Girls Gone Wild video series.
It's pretty obvious. Everybody's doing it willingly and here in public.
By 2002, Joe's business is expanding. He would look at where in the country there were big spring break hubs. And he would check what night.
So people on the right look at Girls Gone Wild as primarily a tale of individuals and personal responsibility. People on the left see it more as a product of society, social norms. I embrace both perspectives. And I think it's important to recognize that Girls Gone Wild would not be celebrated today the way it was 15 years ago. So I wrote on the sex industry from 1995 until the fall of 2007.
Clubs these girls were going to, what beaches they were hanging out at, because if the Girls Gone Wild crew found a girl who was on vacation, she would be a little less inhibited.
New York and LA, ain't nobody going on Girls Gone Wild. It's a different mentality. We hit the towns where we thought girls.
And this is a woman who worked on Girls Gone Wild from a Hollywood family, and her big successful Hollywood dad told her that Joe Francis is an obnoxious guy, but he's really stumbled onto a gold mine, and her own father kind of encouraged her to work in this field. But remember, this whole business model depends upon tricking and seducing women into doing something that was very much against their own best interests.
Girls were bored.
I mean, just imagine what that does to your soul, where your model is taking advantage of people. Now, I hope I don't come across in these live streams as someone who thinks, oh, I am a better person than Joe Francis. I'm a better person than this or that person who I criticize, because I've done a lot of scummy things in my own time, and I've had all sorts of addictions operating in my life where when you've got an addiction operating, right, you essentially use and abuse everybody you can to meet those addictive needs. And I've had addictions just running riot in my own life for most of my life. So I hope I don't come across at all as holier than thou or superior to the predators described in this documentary.
It was in West Virginia. It was in Southern Florida. It was in Texas.
Interesting that the girls in LA and New York would not go for this kind of shenanigan.
We advertised that we were in town. Radio stations were playing Girls Gone Wild. There'll be a, club solo on Friday night.
Ah, this is key from the chat. Showing tits is pretty harmless. Did it get more hardcore than that? Yes. That's how they would advertise it on TV. It's just girls flashing tits. But it was a hardcore porn company. The girls would flash tits, and that would be what was advertised, and that would be what would be talked about in the media. But they would get these girls to perform hardcore sex scenes, right? They would trick girls into getting drunk and performing in hardcore pornographic scenes that would then haunt them for the rest of their life. So it wasn't just this harmless flashing tits operation, right? It's a life-destroying operation.
The girls were excited that we were coming to town. I mean, it literally was like a bus of Hollywood coming to them. Like,
I don't think people would be nearly as excited about Girls Gone Wild coming to town now, because this is much less socially acceptable. It's a way that our society has gotten healthier and stronger and more moral compared to 15 years ago.
Cameras, cute guys, big brand, if Joe popped up, woo, even better.
There's a production team already on the ground they're like stationed there, right? And I move around for a month of spring break and basically go everywhere. Like here, Cancun, Jamaica, everywhere.
All right, so grateful for Kip, because even though I keep disagreeing and criticizing and challenging him, like he doesn't take it personally. He notes in the chat on the X stream right now, most dudes don't pass on their genes, most women do. Correct. So men are much more incentivized to take chances, to be risk takers than women. Most women do reproduce. So I remember walking with a couple early on in my Jewish journey. She was Israeli. He was not Jewish yet. He would go on to convert, and I played a substantial role in his conversion. And they had several kids. He was black, and so they had 3 or 4 mixed race kids. And he was happy for the kids to play next to this stream that was flowing on by. And the mother, however, was much more anxious and fearful. And she would say, I carried each of these children in my belly for 9 months. Right. Yes, I'm much more afraid than you are about what's happening. Kip says, here we are after 56 years of goofing off. Embrace your underachievement. Own it. Americans work really hard. That's something that most non-Americans don't understand. Americans have achieved, on average, an extraordinary standard of living that is far higher than most other countries. I mean, the standard of living in the United Kingdom, for example, is just so far below that in America. But Americans work incredibly hard. They're the hardest working, most productive workers in the world. Kip says, sign me up for the He-Man Woman Haters Club 40. These Sheilas aren't worth the hassle. And I have had a substantial amount of misogyny in my own heart as a product of my emotional addictions. And it was one coping mechanism that I developed because some of the women that looked after me when I was just a wee lad would smack me around. But I think there are more productive ways to go through life. Who knew that Girls Gone Wild would be the harbinger of the state of modern women? I think I'm going to side more with the left here. I think Girls Gone Wild is much more of an indicator of the sexual and social health of the society, probably more so than the individual bad choices of women, right? Traditionally, men have protected women, a father, a husband, an uncle. Right? I think that is the natural evolutionary model that men protect and provide for the women in their lives.
Spring break was happening and the words to document it, I was.
That was boom, 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 next city, next city, next city.
One of Joe's earlier TV appearances is on a show called Jenny Jones, and
he was such a huge part of pop culture back in the aughts, right? And he got really soft coverage. The publisher of Playboy, right? He essentially had a lifetime of soft coverage. And part of it was that a lot of movers and shakers in the news media went to parties thrown by Hugh Hefner and the Playboy organization, and he would often have secret cameras running in the rooms of his various operations. So he would capture blackmail on important people, which probably played a significant role in him essentially escaping scot-free from the consequences of ruining so many lives.
can see how popular Girls Gone Wild is and how popular it is with the guys. They are treating Joe.
So as I start to watch this documentary and just develop a sense of the vast amount of destruction that he wrought, I looked up Joe Francis online. It's like, please God, let him not be Jewish. And thank God Joe Francis is not Jewish.
So, like, he's a god. And the women in the audience also want to participate.
You had the cameras today. You could pick a few women in the audience.
Women are far more sensitive to social cues. And so they were picking up on the social cues that this was harmless. I don't think they would get the same social cues today.
Wouldn't want to offend anybody. There are a lot of very attractive women in the audience. It's not everybody's thing.
1, 2, who would do it? 3, 4, 5. Oh my God.
He was not a dumb guy. He sees girls letting their freak flag fly. So he was selling young girls this assertion that what he was giving them was freedom and power that we are not.
And many of the girls that he was capturing were underage. And so when I would interview pornographers, they would always stick up for the legality and morality of what they were doing. But pornographers used to feature a tremendous amount of kiddie porn until 1977, when the United States Congress passed very harsh measures against kiddie porn. So the only reason that the respectable pornographers today don't traffic in kiddie porn is because there are very harsh penalties against it. And Joe Francis, particularly in the early days of Girls Gone Wild, would capture the nudity of females as young as 13.
Not exploiting these young women. We're giving them an opportunity to empower them.
And this is Amy Wallace, a wise, thoughtful journalist.
And actually, he was offering them anything but. Maybe freedom, but absolutely no power.
Yeah, the idea that you get empowered by posing
in the 90s,
nude.
during spring break, MTV did a bunch of programming from the beach.
Yeah, it was a different era, a much more permissive era. And I think we've grown up since then.
Dance. So I went on, they would call.
Right, this is a woman whose life was just destroyed from one ill-considered flashing of her tits, like 9 seconds of video that would just go on to destroy her life.
I didn't like that things were fuzzy.
Right, she doesn't remember what happened that night, right? She passed out. She was so heavily intoxicated, right? A normal, sane society would try to protect its intoxicated women from being destroyed this way. And I would think
we went home.
I think if she had a good relation with her father and with her family, she would have been less likely to have placed herself in such a vulnerable position.
Months later, two of my best friends from college, we were hanging out on the couch, watching TV. You know, the normal nightcap. And I remember vividly, late at night, obviously another Girls Gone Wild commercial comes on. And we all just kind of sat there and our mouths dropped open. And I was like, oh my God. That is me.
And this would haunt her for the next 20 years. Right? Strangers would come up to her. She'll get DMs. People would ask her to autograph material. Like, she doesn't want to be reminded of this ill-considered night
when we had this huge party.
So Joe Francis ran into some considerable opposition in the Bible Belt when he went to Palm Beach, Florida.
I happened to be shooting a scene with this girl. She was rather intoxicated. The police realized there was underage drinking going on. They told everybody to get out. This girl told the police, he just made me get drunk and he made me film get naked. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get in trouble. The police officer turns to me and says, can I get a copy of that?
So people who do the right thing and the wrong thing, they're not completely separate people. All right. I had an acquaintance, an author, around 2004, who went to Eastern Europe because, number one, he wanted to fight sex trafficking. Number two, he wanted to have sex with a lot of Eastern European women. He ended up getting imprisoned for several months in Eastern Europe. It was absolutely a miserable experience. He returned home to Massachusetts and he killed himself. But right, the same people who may whack off to Girls Gone Wild, right, may simultaneously recognize that this is not a good thing for society.
There was no hostility. It was a party time that trip. The next trip was completely different.
So people seem to be having a lot less sex these days. People seem to be much more considered in their sexual choices. Probably a good thing. And Liv Medley says how much of low alcohol consumption among Zoomers is due to fear of clips of them going wild on social media. Good point. Good question.
Joe Francis, what a miserable little shit.
Right, so
I'd
this
pinch
is
that little
Police
shit's
Chief.
head off and crap down his neck if I could.
Right, Lee Sullivan, former mayor, former police chief of Palm City?
My name is Lee Sullivan. I served as the chief of police for the city of Panama City Beach, Florida for 20 years. I served as the mayor of Panama City Beach, Florida for 8 years.
The challenge of having visitors is simply this. You set parameters, then you require everyone to stay within those parameters, and those that can't can either leave or go to jail.
Even though Panama City Beach was a party town, most of Panama City Beach is a small, sleepy community. And during spring break, actual residents hated it. By the time Joe Francis came along, it just gets worse and worse.
So I've been blogging since 1997, and I've always had a sense that I want what I put out there publicly to not arouse the passionate opposition of those I live amongst, right? I want to have it more likely than not that people will be either okay or even supportive of what I'm putting out there publicly. It's a very dangerous thing to go against the best interests of a community. It's not where you want to be.
And worse for these residents.
News started to spread that Girls Gone Wild Productions were in town, getting footage of girls who came from perfectly nice families with fathers who were very upset about this.
The fact that girls expose themselves.
It's amazing that no angry father has exacted retribution, a la, wasn't it a Hollywood movie, Hardcore, or something like 1977, where a father goes on a tear to exact vengeance for his girl who got sucked in with the pornography industry? Was it George Scott, starring George Scott?
Or suck each other's tongue. I mean, if that's on private property, that's none of my business. But you get out on the public rights-of-ways, the thoroughfares, the parks.
One of the things I appreciate about Judaism is the sharp distinction between public and private, right? Between adult and child, between the holy time, the Sabbath, and the other days of the week, right? A recognition of the importance of distinctions, I think, is valuable.
Show me your tits on film, you know. You start doing that, and it is all my business. I was not going to have this community known as a venue for Joe Francis' peep show. I saw him, and I said, hey, asswipe, this isn't going to work. This is a...
You don't want to mess with people who have guns. You don't want to treat trivially people who have the power to ruin your life.
My town. You need to pack your shit and get out of Dodge.
You guys need to get in your cars, find a place to go.
Girls Gone Wild's crew was under surveillance at all times, and they began to complain.
And Joe Francis made a really bad decision, right? He decided to fight.
Just getting off on destroying my life.
Right? He chose to go to war with Panama City.
Wait, who's that?
My girlfriend.
Nice. What's your name?
Okay, this is a 3-part documentary series on Peacock, on Joe Francis. Story about the American apparel owner. Yeah, he was Jewish, he was brash, he would manufacture in Los Angeles, and he was profiled in an article for one magazine where he whacked off, he masturbated in front of the journalist. And a friend invited me to spend the night at the home of that journalist. We were going to do a whole bunch of things, but I was too stiff and inflexible to do that. I like my own. In different locations, bad idea to violate the norms of a particular place, right? If you start causing harm to people, you are incentivizing them to harm you, and it really doesn't matter if you don't think that you're causing harm. If other people experiences it as harm, you are likely in for a world of hurt. Right? A healthy society would be horrified that drunk young women, drunk girls are being taken advantage of by pornographers. Kip says that my own hometown police wanted me to leave town as well. Harm is a relative term. Well, what constitutes harm depends on your hero system. You may say it's wildly overused, but just because you don't think something is harmful doesn't mean that another person won't experience it differently. So harm depends on the hero system. It depends on the community. It depends on the individual. There's not a universal objective definition of harm. For some women, all right, being captured in a pornographic video by Girls Gone Wild would cause more harm than if they were punched in the face and lost 15. He was able to convince girls to do crazy self-destructive things, in part through the use of alcohol and in part through sophisticated manipulation techniques and in part through peer pressure. So when I would go cover a porn set, I was often loathed and reviled in the porn industry. But once I was able to go on a set and establish a conversation and an interview with one person, then it made it easier for me to interview the next person because it became socially acceptable. But if I start talking to one person, they tell me to F off, then I'm very likely to be sunk. Then other people will take that cue and stop talking to me. So one of the biggest challenges of a reporter is to get people to talk to you. And so you want to establish a virtuous cycle. When I started my book on movie producers, right, I was very quickly on, I would list the people I'd already spoken to make it much more socially acceptable to grant me an. This was the Girls Gone Wild was advertising on Fox Sports, on Comedy Central, on all sorts of major American TV networks, right? We're allowing ads for Girls Gone Wild for hardcore pornography. So if her editor, right, had signed off on it, she would have gone. So young people often need the sage advice of their elders. If she'd gone to that compound in Mexico, it likely would not have gone well for her. There are advantages to having an editor, and my online work bears the hallmarks of many of the disadvantages of not having an editor. On the other hand, right, there are advantages that come with not having an editor. So I'm sure Claire Hoffman's piece, right, was benefited by having a wise, older, experienced journalist such as Mrs. Alexander here direct and edit.
That moment as soon as possible. Write down every single.
So I often miss points. I often don't logically establish the points that I'm trying to make in my writing because I haven't usually had an editor, because things are clear in my head, but I don't necessarily translate that clarity to the things that I say and the things that I write. So Claire Hoffman's piece relied in large part upon an email that she wrote to herself, and that's where I get many of my blog posts or ideas that I want to discuss on a live stream. It'll often begin with an interview exchange with a friend. And that was not many people can handle drugs. Not many people can handle sexual promiscuity without going off the rails. But there are some high IQ, highly disciplined people like Jack Nicholson. He seems to have handled his drug experimentation. He seems to have handled his sexual promiscuity. Warren Beatty also. I don't recall any rape charges being lodged against these stars. Most people would probably go nuts with their level of sexual promiscuity. And just because some high IQ people can handle certain levels of vice doesn't mean that these same vices would not destroy people of a lower social class or a lower level of intelligence or people with fewer friends, family connections. And Joe Francis says, never did anything wrong, right? I'm innocent guy.
It loosened everything up.
What does that mean?
It really did. I think it just made for so much more fun.
He's talking about his contributions to American culture. He loosened everything. Gavin Newsom, I didn't see many examples of how these LA fires can be blamed on Gavin Newsom. Good point in the chat. But didn't the people vote to build water reservoirs and nothing was done? Yes. Now, is that primarily Gavin Newsom's fault? Or do we just have so many substantial legal challenges to getting anything done, that it makes it nigh impossible to get. Because someone talks about something very intimate or has done something very intimate for public consumption doesn't mean that they want to talk about it when you run into them in public. My favorite moral guide to life is imagine that you are being followed by a film crew or a bunch of reporters for the New York Times who are going to accurately report what you say and do, and it's going to be presented on the front page of the New York Times. How then would you choose to act and to speak? So my experience of life is that women are about as third as likely as men to take responsibility. I would expect this is an evolutionary thing, that down through history, men were expected to take responsibility, including responsibility for the women who were under their protection and care. For much of my childhood, early adulthood, middle adulthood, and when you're filled with self-loathing, you tend to make a lot of terrible choices. And I would expect that many of the women who work in the sex industry come from a place of self-loathing that distorts their ability to judge what's appropriate. It sounds like Joe Francis probably earned about $500 million from Girls Gone Wild. And then he would lose almost all of it in litigation, particularly when he went up against Steve Wynn out of Las Vegas. Joe Francis estimates he lost between $100 to $300 million in the Panama City litigation. A girl that he met through a nationwide model search for the most beautiful woman in America. And he ends up having a relationship with her and 2 children with her.
Or living and take it down.
Right. It's damaged girls would be the most likely to participate, and then they're going to be the most vulnerable and have the most difficult time dealing with the abject consequences of being featured in Girls Gone Wild. Dozens of people made their living by getting girls drunk and manipulating them into incredibly self-destructive behavior that will live on forever.
And nobody said, hey, this is fucked up, you know? Nobody.
So you can't rely on strangers to treat you well, but you would think a society would want to be a little bit more outraged by this behavior. And I don't think that the Girls Gone Wild would fly today.
Batted an eye.
If you were part of a traditional community, you would not have been as vulnerable to this kind of exploitation. So when you live in a traditional community, people watch out for each other. And you have such intense ties with people that you would never want to act in a public way that would damage those ties.
I kind of wonder.
All right, good for you, Marc Schmitz, for grappling with what you did and the consequences. This is Ross Douthat of the New York
From New
Times.
York Times Opinion, I'm Ross Douthat, and this is Matter of Opinion. So listeners, you're going to be hearing more from me over the next couple of months, because I'm going to be hosting some one-on-one conversations to help you, and quite frankly me, understand the factions and the players that are likely to shape the incoming Trump administration. And today we're going...
So Ross Douthat is never Trump, but he's a sensitive and frequently fair chronicler of right-wing politics.
I'm going to start with Silicon Valley and the so-called tech right. I'm someone who follows politics primarily and Silicon Valley secondarily. And to me, the alliance between that industry and the Democratic Party has always seemed like a pretty solid fact of American politics. I could definitely see the leaders of the tech industry souring on certain aspects of progressive politics, especially the parts that cast them as special villains. But I really didn't expect so many figures in Silicon Valley, starting, of course, with Elon Musk, to throw their support and their money and their social media clout behind Donald Trump in 2024. My guest today is one of those tech leaders, venture capitalist Marc Andreessen. For decades, he was, in his words, a good Democrat. But now...
I expected the governor of Ohio to nominate Vivek Ramaswamy for the open U.S. Senate seat now that J.D. Vance is going to be the vice president of the United States. But apparently that didn't happen, and Vivek Ramaswamy has announced his candidacy for governor of Ohio. Vivek's been quite silent on social media the last 2 weeks.
Now, he's been spending time at Mar-a-Lago and advising on the Trump transition. Marc brought many of us to the internet in the 1990s. And just as a political matter, you supported Barack Obama for president. You voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And then in 2024, you supported Donald Trump. And we're going to talk about that evolution. But I wanted to start by just going way back in time to the origins of your career, because you were present for the early days of the internet, not really the beginning of Silicon Valley.
So Chuck Schumer in today's New York Times is taking credit for helping to convince Joe Biden to drop out of the race. This is Chuck Schumer speaking in February of 2024 about how sharp Joe Biden is.
I talk to President Biden, regularly, sometimes several times in a week, or usually several times in a week. His mental acuity is great. It's fine. It's as good as it's been over the years. I've been speaking to him for 30 years, since we worked on the Brady bill and the assault weapons ban when I was a young congressman. He's fine. All this right-wing propaganda that his mental acuity has declined is wrong. He's going to win the election because he has a great record, because more and more Americans are seeing that record. I talked to President Biden.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chuck Schumer. Back to Ross Douthat talking to Marc Andreessen.
Valley itself, but the beginning of Silicon Valley as a crucial influence in American life, I would say. And since we're talking about how the tech industry has changed, how it's interacted with big shifts in American politics, I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about what it was like for you to go from the small town in Wisconsin where you grew up, New Lisbon,
yes,
right?
Yeah, that's right.
Not a large population, to, let's say, the point where you were involved in selling Netscape for billions of dollars in the late 1990s.
So I'm happy to talk about all of that. I started out in rural Wisconsin and farming country, kind of basically the polar cultural opposite of Silicon Valley in many ways, and the polar political opposite, for a very long time. By the way, I didn't discover...
Just looking at what appears to be another scam ad, Relief Factor, right? Big scam. And I think the Salem radio hosts do their shows from the Relief Factor pain-free studio. Doesn't just make pain, it eliminates pain, right? Just another scam that subsidizes right-wing media.
Until much later that I'm an archetype. Tom Wolfe wrote a famous profile of Robert North.
And I don't want to pretend that I'm particularly righteous. If Relief Factor offered to sponsor my studio at a certain level of payment, I would take it. And I would say the cues that they would pay me to say.
Noyce, who was the original founder of Intel, the original CEO, and the father of the chip industry. And actually, Noyce and I followed very similar paths. I never met him, and he was an earlier generation, but he grew up as an Iowa farm boy. I grew up as a Wisconsin farm boy, and we and a lot of other people like us over the years have kind of made this trek. And then basically, I'm a product of the great land grant universities, right? So the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, which from where I came from was like a huge leap to actually leave the state and go to a university that large. And they had this incredible influx of money at the time from the federal government for for supercomputers, and then what turned out to be the internet. Actually, by the way, full credit, led by Al Gore when he was in the Senate. I always thought he got unfairly treated by how people describe this later, but he led the push. Yeah.
In inventing the internet.
So this is...
And Kip is really trying to trigger me now. He says, Ross Douthat has game, but he's no David Irving. But who is? David Irving is an interesting character. He's done some quite respectable history, and he has also done a lot of insane publications. So he's all over the map. And he's come around on his Holocaust denial. Now he's back accepting much of the conventional narrative with regard to the Holocaust.
This is actually the thing. He gets knocked down. So the famous quote is, "I invented the internet." What the actual quote, he never said that. I'll defend Al's honor to the death. Is he said, "I took the lead in the Senate in creating the internet." And what he meant by that is he was the tip of the spear for funding 4 national supercomputing centers. And so he picked 4 college campuses. Illinois was one of them. So we basically, Illinois campus, when I was there, it was like living.
Looking at another ad here on Fox News. This is for University of Phoenix, the online program. another giant scam. Ugh. Ugh.
In the future. We had computers that cost up to $30 million a pop that basically were representative of what was to come, but we just had them a decade before everybody else because of this program. And then I did early research work there basically that resulted in the Mosaic browser, which was kind of the browser that kind of broke the concept of the internet and the web kind of through to the mainstream. And then I came to Silicon Valley, not because I was particularly enthusiastic about it at the time, because it was just the default thing to do. And I figured at least I can get a job and, kind of work in the tech industry. And when I was in college from 89 to 94, I'm sure you probably remember, there was a very severe recession depression that felt like the end of the world. And it felt like the end of the American tech industry, actually in the late 80s, early 90s, which was sort of the peak of the ascendance of Japan in there. Yeah, so I think the way to describe it is I think the Valley before me, from like the 50s through the 70s, was sort of, they were normie Republicans. They were business people, CEOs, investors, and they would have been, I assume at the time, big fans of Nixon, big fans of Reagan, so forth. That era was basically over by the time I arrived. I met a few of those guys, but when I got there in 94, it was in the full swing of the Clinton-Gore kind of, restoration of the Democratic Party, kind of recovery of liberalism as a mainstream political force. And this goes back again to Al Gore's role in this, who I got to know quite well, and Bill. Basically it was the pro-business Democratic Party, it was the pro-tech Democratic Party, it was the pro-startup Democratic Party. And so Clinton and Gore and their administration was incredibly...
Well, the Democratic Party has been quite pro-business since the 1980s, because almost all lobbying, almost all donations come from business, right? The business lobby, right, donates 10 to 1 for every dollar from unions and consumer groups.
Enthusiastic about what we were doing. I mean, Al Gore was just thrilled because he's like, wow, this whole program that I funded in the Senate worked incredibly well. The internet worked, and now we're going to have this giant economic boom. It's going to be led by dynamic entrepreneurial capitalism, right? Like, they celebrated it. They loved it. They embraced us. It was like a full-fledged love affair, and that was the sort of foundation for the great entrepreneurial and economic growth boom of the 1990s, and America's back. And, Japan, as it turned out, was not going to take over the world, and China was still, off in the distance somewhere. And so it was this incredible restoration of kind of American economic supremacy, technological supremacy. And so as a result of that, the most natural thing in the world for somebody like me was, of course, I'm a normie Democrat. I'll be a normie Democrat forever. Normie is what I call this the deal with a capital D. Like, nobody ever wrote this down, but like, it was just something everybody understood, which is, you're me, you show up, you're an entrepreneur, you're a capitalist.
As I scroll through X, it does not speak well of MAGA, that they are so behind someone so manifestly unqualified to be Secretary of Defense as Pete Hegseth. So I expect that there will be some improvements in the delivery of government services under Donald Trump, but I think there's also going to be a tremendous amount of degradation of government services and a tremendous amount of corruption and incompetence.
You start a company, you grow a company. If it works, you make a lot of money, and then the company itself is good because it's bringing new technology to the world that makes the world a better place. But then you make a lot of money, and then you give the money away, right? And through that, you absolve yourself of all of your sins. And then in your obituary, it talks about what an incredible person you were, both in your business career and in your philanthropic career, and it's great. And then, by the way, you're a Democrat, you're pro-gay rights, you're pro-abortion, you're pro all the sort of fashionable, and sort of appropriate social causes of the time. And literally, it was like there are no trade-offs. Like, this is the deal. And then, of course, everybody knows Republicans are just like knuckle-dragging racists, and it was just kind of taken as given that there was going to be this great relationship. And of course, it worked so well for the Democratic Party, and Clinton and Gore, sailed to re-election in 96.
So CIA analyst Asif Rahman has pled guilty to leaking Israeli strike plans on Iran.
And the Valley was locked in for, 100 years to come, just to be straight up conventional blue Democrat.
I want to talk about the deal for a minute, because it certainly lasts culturally down into the Obama years. Right. So by the time Barack Obama is running for president, it's sort of taken for granted that there's going to be a ton of Silicon Valley money on his side. The incredible enthusiasm for the Obama candidacy is particularly strong among sort of tech-savvy young people. There's a huge narrative with that campaign about how the Democratic Party is on the cutting edge of digital technology. They're using the internet to defeat the stodgy Republicans, right? So stodgy, they can't even use the internet to organize a campaign, right? So that narrative certainly persists. But through this whole period, the Democratic Party was still the party of higher tax rates and higher spending relative to the Republicans. Yeah. So Silicon Valley was accepting at some level in this era that in supporting Democrats, you were going to get a slightly higher top marginal tax rate, a slightly higher corporate tax rate, a slightly higher tax rate on capital gains than if you went in for, whatever the Republicans from Bob Dole down to George W. Bush and John McCain were offering. Is that right? Was that sort of understood too, that part of the deal was you were on board with?
So Lily Phillips has announced a backdoor challenge. Tuesday, January 21, she'll be having anal sex with as many guys as possible. I would assume that that's going to be condom clad, but I can't imagine that's great for you.
again, sort of moderate liberal, slightly higher taxes policies?
Yes. So A, yes, 100%. I would say B, even more than that. We all voluntarily live in California.
Right.
So we have the, we not only have the federal dimension of what you're saying, we also live in these very high tax cities, you know, San Francisco, Palo Alto. And so, yeah. And I think by paying higher taxes and not objecting to them, that you prove you're a good person. Okay. Like for that generation of enlightened centrist liberal, it was, of course, we pay higher taxes because, you know, we're the Democratic Party is an agent of positive social change. And, you know, of course, you want to have a bigger safety net. Of course, you want to.
And Kip says the world is full of shysters and simpletons. The shysters prey on the simpletons, and the simpletons pray to heaven for some relief. But in a society with more cohesion and social trust, and where we have more of a sense that we're in it together, right, there's going to be more stigma and opposition directed at shysters and more protection for the simple-minded.
Fund all these programs and you want to fund all these activist campaigns. And of course you want that. You know, the term Camelot was never used, but there was a Camelot feeling to it at the time that people must have felt in the early 60s in the same way, which is just like, wow, like, yes, it's all happening and it's all going to happen and it's going to be great. So yeah, that was like a full-fledged part of the deal. But then look, quite honestly, I am trying in none of this to like claim moral high ground or moral sheen or anything, but just to kind of take the edge off of that if that's how I've come across. Quite honestly, the tax rates didn't really matter because when an internet company worked, it grew so fast and got so valuable that, you know, you just, if you worked like another 3 years, you'd make another 10x. And so another 5% higher tax rate washed out in the numbers. And so we weren't forced to really think that hard about it. It just seemed like this was the formula that would result in everything working.
And then running through that too, though, there was also sort of a cultural assumption, not just that it made sense to be liberal on social issues like same-sex marriage and abortion, but also that liberalism was going to be the party of sort of openness, free speech, free argument, and a kind of utopian vision, I would say, of human freedom, which obviously wasn't always there in the institutional Democratic Party. But there's this term I'm sure you've heard that was coined, I think, by critics of Silicon Valley called the Californian ideology, right, which they described, I think this was in the 1990s, as marrying the cultural bohemianism of San Francisco with the high-tech industries of Silicon Valley. The Californian ideology promiscuously combines the freewheeling spirit of the hippies and the entrepreneurial zeal of the yuppies. Obviously, they're taking a dig, but I think that's the spirit of the hippies is also important here, the sense that you're on the side of this kind of cultural openness.
Yeah, that description, by the way, is exactly right. And the California ideology was real and correct. And the Valley had always incarnated a specific version of that. So, you know, the two origin points for hippie culture, as we now, you know, understand it today, were basically the Laurel Canyon in LA, which we were not connected to, but the Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, which was, you know, at ground zero of tech also. And so, you know, we literally were one of the two kind of inception points for the hippie revolution in the 60s and 70s and the whole general, you know, new left and like all that stuff. By the way, Berkeley also, right, UC Berkeley is hugely important to the Valley. And of course, Berkeley, you know, the birthplace of at the time, what they called the free speech movement. You know, my business partner, Ben, my longtime partner, Ben's father, David Horowitz, who's now a radical, you know, right-wing political activist in the 60s and 70s, was a radical left-wing political activist.
Yes, everyone who was a young person on the political right in the 1990s and early 2000s, as I was, has had at least one encounter with David Horowitz of one kind or another, in which, yeah, the spirit of 60s radicalism definitely lived on in his post-radical phase, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, but he was like literally on campus when anti-Vietnam War, right, was starting to crank up. And so like that was all happening at the same time that Silicon Valley started to boot up, and there was lots of back and forth between that. And the other side was more the Bob Noyce side of things, you know, that I alluded to, which is you had these like literally Midwestern farm boys showing up who were squares, not hippies, very much square, you know. And if you look at like old photos of like the Intel team when they were young, it's literally, you know, short sleeve white shirts with ties and tie clips, and, you know, they look like the Michael Douglas character from Falling Down. You know, they look like defense contractors. And what the Valley did, to its credit, was it fused those mentalities, and the fusion most specifically showed up in the form ultimately of Steve Jobs. He had all of the accoutrements and all of the artistic judgment. Then he had famously done LSD, and he had all these alternative, you know, beliefs. He had been to India, but he was also, you know, right, as we know, like a ruthlessly competitive industrialist. And so, you know, he kind of fused both sides of that, and that fusion has been where a lot of the magic is. That naturally brings in both left and right wing politics, and then that definitely takes us to the dynamic that's happening today.
So, from your perspective, when did you start to have doubts about the synthesis of Silicon Valley and the Democratic Party?
Yeah, so the breakdown was during the second Obama term. Wall positive press coverage. This was also, by the way, in the wake of the Arab Spring, which at the time, you'll recall, was like an unalloyed good. Like, obviously, all these countries are going to be much better off. Obviously, the fact that
by the Obama White House, or are they fundamentally about sort of the big shift leftward among young people that clearly starts in that era?
So I would say both, because the unifying thread here is, I believe, it's the children of the elites, right? The most privileged people in society, the most successful, send their kids to the most politically radical institutions who, you know, teach them how to be like America-hating communists. And then they fan out into the professions. Our companies hire a lot of kids out of the top universities, of course. And then, by the way, a lot of them go into government. And so we're not only talking about a wave of new arrivals into the tech companies, we're also talking about a wave of new arrivals into the congressional offices. And of course, they all know each other. And so all of a sudden, you have this basically this influx, this new cohort. And my only conclusion There was a point where kind of the median newly arrived Harvard kid in 2006 was like a career-obsessed striver. And their conversation with you was, when do I get promoted and how much do I get paid and when do I end up running the company? And like, that was the thing. By 2013, the median newly arrived Harvard kid was like, fuck it, we're burning the system down. Like, you are all evil. White people are evil. Men are evil. Capitalism is evil. Tech is evil.
But they're working for you. These are people who are working for you.
Of course. So I had this moment with a senior executive who I won't name, but he said to me, you know, he had this conversation in 2014, and he said to me with kind of this sense of dawning horror. He's like, I think some of these kids are joining the company not with the intent of doing things for us, but destroying us. Like,
when Mark Zuckerberg gets hauled in front of Congress to be grilled about disinformation and things like that, do you think that he thought to himself, yes, Facebook is deeply and profoundly responsible for Donald Trump getting elected and Vladimir Putin influencing American politics? Because my perception in the Trump years was that a lot of the people at the top of Silicon Valley were sort of essentially going along with these narratives because they were afraid of their employees and because they were afraid of Democrats in Washington. I mean, I wrote a column about this at the time. I said basically that, you know, in any dispensation, businessmen have to ask themselves, what am I required to do to make money unmolested by the government? And so Zuckerberg is thinking to himself, right now, what I'm required to do is run a sort of strict anti-disinformation fact-checking apparatus and say the right things in front of congressional committees.
So I don't want to speak specifically for Mark.
Right. No, people high up, generally.
I'll speak for the group, because there's a lot of similarities between the different. What was sort of increasingly clearly a social revolution, like very clearly, like companies basically being hijacked to be engines of social change, social revolution. You know, the employee base is going feral. You know, there were cases in the Trump era. There were companies, multiple companies I know, that felt like they were hours away from full-blown violent riots on their own campuses by their own employees. Like, things got really aggressive during that period. So, you know, I go from watching Brian Williams every night and just being lied to, 500 nights in a row, you know, to basically, you know, reading the Mueller report, reading the Horowitz IG report, you know, and just being like, oh my God, none of this is true. And then you try to explain to people this isn't true, and then they get really mad at you because how can you possibly have any sympathy for a fascist? Anyway, so
that's happening to you.
Yeah.
So you are radicalizing in the late Trump years.
Yeah, for sure. And people like me. There were quite a few people like me. Now, none of us were sticking our heads up at that point because it was, like, to be clear, way too dangerous. Like, none of us were, like, I don't think particularly moral heroes in that point. But there were lots and lots of underground peer-to-peer discussions kind of from, call it 2018 through to 2021, saying, okay, things are off the rails. Anyway, so my point is, like, we were already softened up for the Biden sort of radicalization. And then when the Biden administration turned out to be far more radical than even we thought that they were going to be, then that's what generated the response.
And so what in concrete terms does that mean? What are the policies that
they came for
shocked or surprised you about the Biden administration?
Yeah, they came for tech, and they came for business in a very broad-based way. And everything that I'm going to describe also, it turns out, I found out later, happened in the energy industry, and I think it happened in a bunch of other industries, but the CEOs felt like they couldn't talk about it. But the problem is, like, the raw application of the power of the administrative state, the raw application of regulation, and then the raw arbitrary, not just enforcement of that regulation, promulgation of that regulation. It was increasing insertion into basic staffing, you know, mandated enforcement of DEI in very destructive ways. You know, some of these agencies have their own in-house courts, which is bananas, but also just like straight up threats and bullying. Mark Zuckerberg just talked about this on Rogan, like direct phone calls from senior members of the administration screaming at executives, ordering them to do things, just like full on, fuck you, we own you, we control you, you're going to do what we want, we're going to destroy you. And then they just came after crypto, absolutely tried to kill us. I mean, they just like ran this like incredible, basically, and the high level thing they say with respect to anything involving tech or business is we want America to win. And what that means is we want America to be the preeminent country in the world. We want America to be the global economic leader. We want America to be the global technology leader. We want America to be the global military leader, right? We 100% want to beat China. We want to make sure that American technology proliferates globally and not Chinese technology. And it's a shame in the past that, you know, so many of you guys were against us because all we wanted was to help you guys win. Energy, right? Like, when this administration, you know, my friend Doug Burgum is the national energy czar, and he's a very successful business tech guy, and he's been given the charter to blow the doors off of American energy and really open it up. And of course, that will be hugely beneficial to the country and obviously to AI, which, you know, soaks up lots of energy. And so, you know, there's a whole bunch of things like that. And then maybe I'll just give you one final thing, which is we need the censorship pressure to end. We need the debanking pressure to end. We need this kind of random terrorism coming out of the federal government, you know, just these agencies kind of running wild. That stuff just needs to be like brought to heel. And, you know, the new administration's been very vocal about how they intend to fix all that. So that maybe would be the final thing.
So where do you think Doge, the Elon Musk run Department of Governmental Efficiency, which is promising some number, trillions of dollars of savings, where does that fit into a tech right agenda?
Yeah. So, and I should say, like, I'm helping Doge on this, but I'm not speaking for Elon. Yeah, just to be clear, not speaking for Elon, not speaking for the administration.
Yeah.
So,
that's clear. Yeah.
So look, look. So when, you know, I talked about Al Gore a lot earlier. You may remember Al Gore had this whole initiative in the 90s called Reinventing Government.
Yes, I remember it well.
Which was Doge 1.0. At the time, it was a normie Democrat thing, which is, of course, you want government efficiency. Of course, you want. There's this natural shifting where the animating issues of 20 years ago are not the animating issues today. I'll just give you one example. Gay marriage 20 years ago was like a very potent political issue in the Valley, but like that issue's done, right? And by the way, now I have all these gay friends who are like super pro-Trump because like that issue's done. done, and like Trump's not going to, like that's finished. The other thing is like the neocon thing. Like 20 years ago, Iraq was a giant motivating thing. It's like, well, the one thing we know, at least God willing, we hope that we know, is like we're not going to do that again, right? And so like it's just no longer an issue.
Right, but part of what's happened is, again, lots of different people have had versions of the narrative that we've talked about throughout this conversation, where they have become alienated from, whatever the liberal establishment was or what it became over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. But those people are themselves widely divergent. And they range from, people on foreign policy who have very hawkish views to people who have more isolationist views. They range on tech policy from people who have your views to, I'm very familiar with people on the right who have very anti-Silicon Valley views. Or
all right. Orthodox Rabbi goes to UCLA.
I was sent by Meaningful Minute to come here to the historic UCLA campus and answer questions about anything and everything, and to find out what's on their minds. Listen, come sit down, and we'll have a positive interaction.
Okay.
How are you? I'm Rabbi Schaff. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, Isabel. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
So you're Orthodox?
I'm an Orthodox rabbi.
Cool. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure.
Why do you believe in the oral tradition apart from the Torah itself?
What a smart question. It's an excellent question. In any language or in any form of communication, a text is just a text. Mm-hmm. And as an example,
so before there was the text, from a secular perspective, all right, before there was the written text of the Torah, there was an oral tradition, eventually got written down in the text of the Torah. And then after you had the Torah, you had other oral traditions which would apply the Torah to changing circumstances. And then this new oral tradition would get written down in the form of the Mishnah and the Talmud.
The words for "in the beginning God created." The first words of the Bible. In Hebrew, they're Bereshit bara Elokim, which, if you'd like, you can translate as Bereshit created God. You can do whatever you really want with the text, and you can twist meanings, which means that there is some sort of presumed understanding of how we're using language and what we're talking about in any conversation. So there are many examples of this, but when it says in the Old Testament, guard the Sabbath day to make it holy. So the Orthodox Jews believe God was trying to say something to a group of people who understood what he meant, and he used their language. So that could mean post guards near a sign that says Sabbath and declare every 8 minutes that it's holy. That sign, right? It could be anything. What does it mean? The concept of an oral tradition is not so much that there was some sort of hidden tradition, but it's that when God spoke, he meant something specific. And if he didn't explain it in the text, then it was explained by context to those people. So I don't know if you know the Jewish tradition to wear tefillin, to wrap. So everywhere.
Comes from Exodus.
That's right. So that's very good. Back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. The tefillin are black, and they're square, and they are wrapped on the arm with leather straps. Who says that? It says nothing about that in the Bible, but it was not ambiguous. So that's the concept of the oral Torah. Really means, on the simplest level, that when God said something, whatever the Torah said, it had a meaning, and that meaning was preserved. So it's interesting because you'll find the Talmud has all kinds of debates. Is it this way? Is it that way? There's never a debate of maybe tefillin are around. It's always about minutia. It spends a lot of time in the prophets about what's called teshuvah, which means repentance, and trying again and trying another time. And Christianity has a different set of beliefs, which are also, I understand, to be very sophisticated, very well thought out, but it's a completely different attitude. The way what we believe is presented is as though you've got to keep the law, but you've got to be perfect to keep the law in order to get salvation. Since no one can do that, there's now a new way.
Here, let me ask you a question then. So you give the analogy of your wife and how you're married and how your wife tries her best. So in that analogy, if your wife committed adultery, like how the Israelites on Mount Sinai committed adultery against God, God was very unpleased, and likewise, I think you as a husband would be very unpleased because that is a covenant of marriage. So if that is something to be broken, that covenant by adultery, then wouldn't you say that that covenant was never meant to be broken in the first place?
Breaking a covenant is a good question, whether or not it can be broken. It's explicit throughout the Old Testament that God will not forsake. Ki lo yitosh Hashem amo v'nachal aso lo yazav. Again and again and again, he says, I will not. Where is the divorce document that I sent to your mother, says God. So there's no such a thing. It didn't happen, according to the Old Testament.
Well, according to Moses, that Moses allowed divorce because of the hardening of their hearts in the Torah.
No. It says explicitly in the Torah, one of the 613 commandments is when a man will take a woman.
So she's using Christian argumentation here, so I presume she's Christian.
Deuteronomy, and she will not find favor in his eyes, that there's a methodology.
So I remember when I was on my journey to Judaism, but living at home with my father, the Christian theologian, he would talk about how God had torn up his covenant with Israel and formed a new covenant with the Christian church.
But Kosav L'Sefer Krisis, he writes for her a document of divorce, and he sends it to her, and she may go and marry another man. It doesn't say anything there in that text about this is because of the hardening of hearts. But even if that were true, that doesn't mean anything more to me than looking at the human condition and deciding that this is what's best, God deciding. It's one of the commandments in the Torah. I think that the human condition is that we were placed here on earth as imperfect people with a
So from a Jewish perspective, this Christian idea that to be right with God, you have to perfectly fulfill Jewish law is absurd. God created us as human beings. How could he then curse us for being human? But it is a fundamental precept in the Christian understanding.
Drive both to do good and a drive.
So Christianity and Christians are obsessed with sin to an extent you do not find in any other religion. Not in Islam, not in Judaism, not in any other religion is there a similar emphasis on the damning power of sin.
Drive to sin. We do not believe that the devil is something that God lost control over or some sort of a thing. We believe that every single human being has urges within them that pull them in the wrong direction, and that those can be elevated into positive things, ultimately, either by overcoming them or sometimes even using them properly. If people didn't have any kind of desire to procreate, says the Talmud, then they wouldn't have families and they wouldn't build homes. So there's something about that same desire that's productive and good. But what I mean to say is the burden of proof is on you. If you can read through the Old Testament and find me one verse which says one must be perfect in order to achieve salvation, and then if you don't do that, you cannot have salvation, then I will need to respond and try to understand that verse. There is no such a thing.
So I'm a Christian, and I believe that Christianity is not just a moral betterment program where we strive to be good people, because inherently we're not good people. In the book of Isaiah, it says there's none righteous, no, not one. All of us like sheep have gone astray, right? Would you say morally that you're a good person?
It's a good question, because it could come across as arrogant for any person to say, I am a good person. On the other hand, I sincerely believe, talking to you, that you...
So I notice that Jews in general have much higher self-esteem than Christians, that most Jews that I know believe that they are a good person. And the only people I know who are tortured with a sense of sin are Christians, right? I just don't know Jews who feel tortured by a sense of sin.
Give the impression that you are a good person and you strive to do good things and that you're a sincere person. I believe you probably treat friends and family kindly. I believe that human beings are fundamentally created in the image of God and have a soul, which means that they are fundamentally good, holy beings. On the other hand, I believe human beings, like it says in Genesis, if left to their own devices and they don't train themselves, the yetzer, the desire of a person from their youth is evil. So it's like Lord of the Flies. If you just leave people without educating them and training them, little children bring in another child with special needs, they can be very cruel. They can be very hurtful. And it's not because they're not inherently good. The only reason we can demand of them, God can say, I expect you to live good lives and be kind and help the widow and the orphan. That's throughout Isaiah too, right? It's because you have to be a good person, which is what you really are. And you're a piece of God. You're in the image of God. There's divine goodness inside of every person. That being said, the verse of Isaiah and the verses do not say there's no person who's a good person. It says, Ein tzadik ba'aretz. There's no man who is fully righteous on this earth. Asher ya'aseh tov, who does good, v'lo yechta, and never falls short. The word.
So it's amusing to me how confident Christians are about the meaning of various verses in the Hebrew Bible when most of the Christians expressing this confidence cannot even read the Hebrew Bible in the Hebrew language. So Jews overwhelmingly, in my experience, tend to feel pretty good about themselves, and this gives them a strength and an energy to be influential in the world, right? If you feel burdened by sin, you're not going to have nearly the energy and the strength to change the world around you. So I think this is an example of how the Jewish outlook on life enables people to be incredibly productive and influential. Check in with Fox
Involved in
News.
at least 7 brutal murders in order to move up the ranks of MS-13. The youngest of his known victims were 16-year-old Kayla Cuevas and 15-year-old Nisa Mickens, who were walking near their home.
So virtually all politicians who favor capital punishment for murder are Republicans, and I can't think of any prominent Democratic politician who favors capital punishment for murder.
Since September 2016, when they were chased down and attacked with baseball bats and a machete. Mickens' father, Robert, shared photos of the last birthday he celebrated with his daughter. According to investigators, Sains and his brother gave their MS-13 cronies the green light to kill the girls.
So a major difference between left and right, generically, is that people on the right are far more eager to do harsh punishment for people like these MS-13 thugs. People on the right are far more eager to punish violent criminals than people on the left.
The heartbroken father told Fox this plea deal is a big mistake, and adding, quote, "I'm not shocked. It's a slap in the face for my family and other families that have to live with the grief for the rest of our lives, knowing that this..."
Yeah, just sickening from a right-wing perspective to see these thugs getting away with horrible behavior.
Kate, which means sin in many places in the Bible, also means lacking and to fall short. So what it's saying is there is no righteous person in the world who's entirely perfectly righteous. That is a basis of the Old Testament. I've never suggested anything otherwise. And therefore I do think that a person who does their best to live a good life and tries their best to be kind and to obey the word of God.
So from a Christian, from a Christian perspective, it's incredible that any individual could think of himself as a good person, because the serious Christian tends to have such a keen sense of sin.
God and to be a good human being to others, I think they are a good person. And I think everyone in the world is fundamentally good. I really believe that. I think you don't even mean that they're not good. I think your religion may teach you that they're not worthy of eternal life, which is another question. We might disagree on that, but say they're not good. No, that's why a human being is held responsible for their behavior. This is why there is, within the Bible, there are punishments and consequences for good things and bad things. There's heaven and hell. You cannot hold the person who was created without goodness, without inherent goodness, responsible for doing something wrong.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
I would say.
Okay, Ross Douthat sends out a weekly column via email. And today is the tortured quest for a morality both liberated and safe. He notes the allegations of sexual assault and abuse against the fantasy writer Neil Gaiman, as recounted in a New York Magazine cover story, read like a gothic tale invented by a writer like Neil Gaiman himself. So you have this traditional stereotype of gothic masculinity. You've got black-clad, wealthy, long of face, creative, hanging out on the edges of civilization with a mysterious, semi-estranged spouse and some kind of buried secret trauma related to Scientology to torment him. Then you have the traditional Gothic questions. Is he a good man underneath? Can the heroine trust him? Is she safe with him? And according to this New York Magazine story, Neil Gaiman is monstrous, cruel, abusive, and perverse. So according to the podcast, which quoted Neil Gaiman through his representatives, his position was that sexual degradation, bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism may not be to everyone's taste, but between consenting adults, BDSM is lawful. So the porn star Nina Hartley and her porner husband Ira Levine had a Friday night Shabbat meal with a Chabad rabbi in Denver. And the Chabad rabbi tried to convince them to adopt traditional Judaism. And Ira Levine said, well, I don't think I can, Rabbi, because I'm into BDSM. The rabbi thought about it, and he stroked his beard, and he said, well, BDSM isn't forbidden. So back to this particular paragraph from the New York Magazine. If you know nothing about BDSM, Neil Gaiman's claim that he was engaging in it with these women may sound plausible. kind of domineering violence he inflicted is common among people who practice BDSM. And all the women, at least at some point, played along, called him their master, texted him afterward they needed him. So I was dating this one girl who was a porn photographer, and she had dated a guy who was into BDSM, and he just continually wanted to play master slave with her and have her like tied up, and it's like it just got too much for her. But she had very strict morality, right? She would never date a man who had ever allowed anything to be inserted into his butthole. Okay, BDSM stands for bondage, discipline, dominance, and submission, and sadism and masochism. So it's a culture with a set of long-standing norms, the most important of which is that all parties must clearly consent. And this is a line that Neil Gaiman apparently did not respect. So from a liberal perspective, you can engage in ethical BDSM. From a more traditional perspective, that sounds silly. So social liberalism is much more on board with novel kinds of sexual morality and novel kinds of morality in general. People on the left are much more open to experimenting with new ways of living lives, organizing families and community. So we have, in the current direction of liberalism, a recoil from the Girls Gone Wild era, a recoil from the Hugh Hefner era. We have returning to older critiques of male predation, but a great deal of wariness with regard to traditional norms of chastity and monogamy. So you still find in liberalism some faith in sexual liberation. So liberalism has developed this peculiarly managerial attitude towards sex. So almost everything is permitted so long as it is adequately litigated and consented to in advance. So adultery is fine as long as everyone follows the rules. Sadism and masochism are fine as long as you have appropriate levels of consent. Fornication between consenting adults in all circumstances is fine unless there are age gaps or power imbalances, which would make the fair litigation suspect. So in this Neil Gaiman piece, you have a set of allegations that includes allegations of sexual assault, and then the context reveals the inadequacy of bare consent as the lone restraint in situations involving celebrity, power, and dominance. But you also have the need to shield and to rationalize not just libertinism, but various specific forms of out there conduct from broader judgment. So from a liberal perspective, there's no general problem with sadism and masochism as sexual appetites any more than there is a general problem with open marriages or sexual promiscuity. Now, where this system breaks down and when bad things happen is because of a failure to establish appropriate parameters, a refusal to abide by therapeutic rules. That's the liberal perspective. But when you read this entire story about Neil Gaiman, right, it underscores just how hard it can be to constrain a predator's behavior or to litigate the murky landscape of power and desire. So there were a couple occasions when I started having sexual intercourse with a woman, and 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 40 seconds in, she changed her mind, said, I don't want to do this. And so I got off of her, but that was not easy. That required extraordinary act of discipline. So if you watch the new Nicole Kidman movie, Baby Girl, all right, it's marketed as an erotic thriller. It's supposed to be a story of self-actualization in which a married middle-aged woman in her 50s who's a powerful executive finds sexual fulfillment, presumably for the first time through a BDSM relationship with a male intern. So it's a transgressive relationship that threatens to overturn her perfect world. But in the end, its effect is redemptive, not destructive. Her marriage is not wrecked because her husband finally begins to offer her the sexual domination that she has always craved. Now, I've noticed that the more powerful the woman I date, the more she wants me to dominate her in the bedroom. Now, the relationships in the movie do not always abide by the ideals of managed intimacy. They do not always follow the BDSM best practices. Nicole Kidman's character is not always interacting honestly with her husband, who is played by Antonio Banderas, where he is finally at a career stage where he can play the cuckold. She does not receive formal permission to open up their marriage. She deceives him and she reaps his anger. Her relationship with the intern does not pass the exacting test that a professional sex educator would impose. So the type of power imbalances in the corporate world that will get you in a great deal of legal trouble are also powerful erotic fuel in the bedroom, noted the creator of Mad Men TV series. So this new Nicole Kidman movie, Baby Girl, is not a great model for the liberal bureaucracy of desire in action. It's much more chaotic and destabilizing. But all the chaos yields the awakening of Nicole Kidman's character and the potential improvement via infidelity of her marriage. And this is the dream that social liberalism wants to preserve. Right, so this careful litany of therapeutic best practices and this kind of managerial liberal approach envisioned for the good sexual citizen that's supposed to allow such awakenings, make them even common without risk, does not seem true to life. Right, there are just so many ways to blow up your life following this story. Probably will get less danger, more happiness overall with simpler norms. Be monogamous, be faithful, stay married, don't indulge and act out fantasies of violence, which would be the more traditional perspective. So you might imagine that there are ways to avoid the Neil Gaiman bad behavior while preserving the imagined baby girl breakthrough. So that's the theory of social liberalism, where what was once taboo is now ubiquitous, even choking during teenage sex. Somehow neither men nor women seem much happier for it. And romance and marriage and the continuation of the human species all slip away into the dark.
Person is not perfect, that in some way they have fallen short of the expectations of a loving God who created as one of the 613 commandments the concept of teshuvah, which means if you have done something wrong, you are to repent, you are to confess your sins to God only, and you are to make commitments to live a better life, and that's explicit.
I think
so I cannot understand how you could think that book wasn't written. Right. Nobody learns to walk. It says in the book of Proverbs, the righteous man falls 7 times and gets up. It calls him a tzaddik. The same word that you said doesn't exist in the world. It doesn't say that. It says the righteous man, the tzaddik, falls 7 times and gets up. That verse which says that the righteous person, the tzaddik, there is no righteous person who's perfect and doesn't sin.
So my own tastes are quite vanilla. I've never tied anyone up, not into tying anyone up. I've never practiced BDSM, never want to go into any of the dark places imagined by either Baby Girl or the Neil Gaiman story.
You can be righteous and you can be holy, but the methodology of human beings is not angelic. We do it through trial and error. We make mistakes. We try again. We get better. I understand that you believe differently. The question is, do you have a strong proof to me from the Old Testament? Otherwise, if not, we just can look at each other and say, listen, you'll tell me you seem like an evil person. I'll tell you seem like a good person. Right. We'll shake hands. And we'll know that we both probably mean the same thing. I'm Rabbi Shaw.
I'm Andrew.
It's good to meet you, Andrew.
You too.
Squeeze in. It's cozy
Thanks.
here.
Appreciate it. I'm tattooed and I'm Jewish.
Yes.
I'm thinking about getting some more pieces done as well. I want to get I was thinking about getting I looked at some of my artist today. It's like he wants to do like a full if you know what a full body sleeve is. So it's gonna be up to here,
wow,
and down to my feet.
Wow.
So what's the rule on that? Because I know for a fact that some of the tattooers I look up to. Ami James, he's Jewish, served in the Israeli army, and he's like one of the best tattoo artists in New York.
Wow.
And when I went to Israel as well, a lot of people there are tattooed. Like the majority of my age, people in their 20s and 30s are seriously tattooed up.
Wow.
What do you feel about that?
I like your question.
One of the big differences that I notice when I walk around UCLA is that there are more people with tattoos. Also, there are far fewer people proportionally with tattoos at UCLA than other places for their age group and peer group. So the more educated the person, the more they've got going on, the less likely they are to get these tattoos. To me, it's a screaming signal that I make terrible decisions.
I think that there's two things I want to share with you. The first thing I want to tell you is that it's not true, the myth that a person couldn't be buried in a Jewish cemetery if they were tattooed. People, it's like a Hollywood thing. That I don't know if some mother tried to scare her kid. On the other hand, it does say explicitly in the Torah that a person should not tattoo themselves permanently. And I have two thoughts about that. One thing is the writings of Rav Hirsch, Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch.
No, I hate water sports. I am vanilla, right? I'm a very respectable man.
Where he says that one of the basic teachings of Judaism is that your body is not you. Your soul is you. Is that what I mean?
Yeah.
In other words, if a person's riding a horse, the horse is walking around naked, but it's not that embarrassing because it's not me, it's my horse, right?
Yeah.
In the words of the immortal Matti Berger, he used to talk about the riding the horse. So people live life and make massive errors because...
Okay, let's go to Kip's comments. What's up with Mark Zuckerberg's new look on the Joe Rogan Experience? The broccoli hair, the rapper's gold change, oversized T-shirt. Mark Zuckerberg keeps changing, and so the way we present ourselves is important. So he loves ancient Rome, so he usually seems to be emulating something out of ancient Roman civilization. But I am not a good person to talk to for aesthetic critiques. That's not my gift. Nietzsche called Christianity the religion of pity. Yeah, there's something to that. But Christianity is incredibly flexible. It's been an instrument of power and domination and nationalism and racism, as well as a power for globalism and anti-racism. Christianity seems to be almost infinitely flexible to fit completely contrary perspectives on the world. Kip says, there's a part of me that thinks Jews and Christians should be kept apart for the good of both. Well, there would be a large number of Jews and Christians that would agree with you, but most would not. My father told me accurately about America. In the United States, religion's a mile wide and an inch thick. Most people who are ostensibly religious in America are not particularly serious about their religion. And the American ethic is that you don't take your religion so seriously that you believe the exclusive claims of your religion. Judaism strives in this life. Christianity strives for the afterlife. Yeah, but most Christians still live primarily for this life. David Lynch left us this week. Was I a fan of Twin Peaks? No. Was I a fan of The Elephant Man? Yes. And I remember when I was interviewing this girl, I became friendly with this porn star. She would joke with me a line from The Elephant Man. You are not an animal, Luke. You're not an animal. You're a human being. What percentage of self-described Christians are on the left? Pretty close to the average in America, about 25%. Without religious bonds, the left yearns for something to believe in, leaving them vulnerable to glomming onto surrogates. We all yearn for something to believe in. Have the face and neck tattoos made it to Westwood? Face and neck tattoos are quite unlikely among the most educated and most successful among us. They are usually a sign of deep pain. So Alexander technique teachers usually come from a place of deep pain. They embrace the Alexander technique as a way of releasing pain. And people who go through life with deep pain are usually deeply damaged. So when I see someone with extreme levels of tattoos, I recognize I'm dealing with someone who's deeply damaged.
They will favor things that are more comfortable for their body than for their soul, for their values, for their morals, for their ideals. And if you would have a rental car, you couldn't come back with bumper stickers and painting it up and switching the rims. They're going to charge you. If you get a hotel room, you can't repaint the walls and redo the floor. It is a critical thing for us to remember.
Actually, you can't do that. Like, I worked in hotels my entire career.
Really?
Yeah.
You could just graffiti up the walls because you
I've
like
seen
it?
it before happen. Like some hotel rooms there, like some hotels and stuff like that. Like famous artists who stay there, they've actually when I lived in New York, for example.
Wow.
Other thing that stands out at me when I walk around UCLA, very few fat people, very few people smoking cigarettes. Right. Very few obvious signs of dysfunction.
In hotels, they would we had a famous street artist come in there.
Without permission, they just started.
They started painting the walls,
painting the lobby and stuff.
Yeah, started painting the walls in their rooms, and that room alone went for like $5 grand a night.
Wow.
Just to see his.
That is really something.
Yeah.
You know that if somebody were to do so without permission, they would be a thief.
Yeah.
And
that's what he did. He did it without permission. They still.
Yeah. So I guess in such a situation, you have Jackson Pollock painting your hotel room. You know? Yeah. So that's a good response. That's a brilliant response, by the way. But I think you understand the attitude here of that.
Right. It's a particular gift for someone to be an Orthodox rabbi, meaning an intense in-group identity, and yet to have such rapport with people from out-groups. Right. This isn't an easy trick to pull off. Right. There's something special about this rabbi.
Body and all of our energies are meant to be used for things that are not purely selfish, and for that reason,
I dated this woman who liked to wear a talit, a prayer shawl, but she'd be told by Orthodox Jews, we just do things because we like them, right? The talit is for men to wear. We follow God's law. We don't just do things because they make us feel good.
We have this idea of a person not being the owner of their body in that same way, and one of the reasons.
And this ethos of I am not my own, right? I belong to God, or I belong to something higher. It helps people navigate the many destructive paths that are common where people just indulge their own inclinations, right? If you live for something higher and transcending your own ego and your own pleasure, it tends to be a pretty good way to live a life.
Says Rabbi Hirsch, one of the reasons, he brings many sources for this, but that's one of the reasons that was understood by Jews to be why we don't tattoo. So that would be like the idea behind it.
Yeah.
I remember I left high school, graduated June 1984, went back and I lived in a working class part of Central Australia. And I was just stunned. It seemed like a majority of people smoked, while in my peer group and among the PhDs and the professors that I knew, right, virtually nobody smoked.
In fact, those Jews you meet in Israel who are tattooed are generally Jews who are not as observant of the Torah and the Torah's, ethos. So it's interesting.
So I knew this young woman who went to tremendous effort to convert to Orthodox Judaism because she'd met a Jewish guy, fallen in love with him. And normally in that circumstance, the rabbis will want the two of you to participate in Orthodox Jewish life, but he didn't want to participate, so they tried to keep their relationship on the down low. And she had tattoos, including a cross on her lower back, and she went and got that taken care of so that she'd be prepared to go for the dip in the mikveh at the end of her conversion process. Unfortunately, she was a bit of a drinker. And one night, she and a woman who was engaged in a BDSM relationship with her sponsoring Orthodox rabbi, they both got drunk. And things were said while they were drunk that when they sobered up led to a falling out. And one woman informed on my friend to the sponsoring Beit Din and just deep sixed her conversion. So despite 3 years and arduous efforts, right, her conversion was finished and she ended up just completely walking away from the process. Now, when I talk to Orthodox Jews, I get a variety of estimates of how many people who passed through an Orthodox Jewish conversion in Los Angeles remained publicly Sabbath observant after 5 years. So I've had rabbis who oversee conversions say 90%, and then I have regular Jews tell me something like 20%.
Interesting, because you can't really be a Christian if you don't believe in Christ. You can't really be a Muslim if you don't believe in Muhammad. You could be a Jew if you don't believe in anything in the Torah, because we're also an ethnicity. We share unique Ashkenazi or Sephardic DNA, which we can trace back a few thousand years. So that's why you can have such a phenomenon. The last thing is, I'll tell you, many of my friends one of my good friends named Jason has a tattoo that he got when he was in his early 20s.
Are there many red-headed Orthodox Jews? I think usually red-headed Orthodox Jews are Hasidic. I don't know if that's literally true. That's just my anecdotal experience.
And he says the truth is different things are important to him in his life now.
Yeah, like I agree with myself.
So are you sure that this tattoo that you want to get is what you want forever for the rest of your life?
Absolutely.
Would you want to wear just this shirt for the rest of it? It's astonishing to me as a
And looking at the chat, Jenny says, archaic, bloody death cult. I don't get why you all are obsessed with these ideas. They don't make any sense. How could I be in heaven if my loved ones are stuck in hell? Well, no intense in-group will make sense to people outside the group, right? There are certain mysteries that only make sense to those in the dance. And any religion not your own is going to look stupid at best, if not downright satanic. Jenny says, I don't need other people to tell me what's right and wrong. I was forced to memorize a lot of the Bible, 3 new verses a day for 365 days a year. Yeah, so a lot of the procedures that religious parents implement and insist that their children undergo often end up sending their kids outside of religion. I was struck about the difference in religious practice between the West Coast and the East Coast. So the West Coast is much more secular. People come here to flee religious, ethnic, and familial obligation. It's a much more individualist ethos on the West Coast. On the East Coast, where you go to school matters a lot more than on the West Coast. Your ethnic identity seems to matter a lot more, and religion is much more intense, and people make more sacrifices for their religion, I notice, on the East Coast compared to the West Coast.
Person to know you can get a tattoo that's going to be great for 2 years at least.
Yeah.
Why is it so important to do something that is absolutely irreversible?
I mean, for me, it's like when I have my tattoos on, it's like it's a way to commemorate my career and also my friends.
Why not have it redone every 2 years? In other words, would you want the same pair of glasses for sure for the rest of your life?
I mean, things for me is like this. It's just like with my.
So there are Orthodox Jews who get temporary tattoos, and so the rabbis might be a lot more lenient with a tattoo that only lasts a few months and then fades away.
Tattoos, I got them on when in my 20s, and they still hold up to today. Like I still have like all my ink done, and it still looks like it's freshly
It looks
done.
fresh. Does it feel to you? You don't have that. There's nothing you would have done differently about those tattoos if you're redoing them.
No.
Yeah, I hate tattoos, but I would never say that to anyone who had tattoos. Like, why be obnoxious?
There's nothing I would have done.
That's so interesting to me. Yeah, that's just like an observation that
I mean,
many people have told me that they.
I mean, my first tattoo I got done right here. My dad was actually with me when I got done, and my dad believes like he believes like no, like my son would never get tattooed. My son would never do this. My son would never do that. And he was with me my first time tattoo shop. He was with me the entire time. He's like.
And Kip says you can't be a Jew if you don't believe in the power of money. Well, I don't think most Jews have some substantially different view on money than non-Jews. I will say that Jews do put a little bit more emphasis on success and on earning than non-Jews, but it's not a night and day difference. And it's pretty common with other middleman minorities such as Armenians.
Like, okay, I can get behind it now. When he came back home with my second one, he's like, okay, I can get behind that. My third one, he's like, all right, I think it's time for you to stop. Suicides, drug overdoses, and alcoholism.
Do you suffer from any of these challenges?
Not so much, no.
Thank God.
No, because like
So all his friends who are chefs suffered from suicides, drug overdoses, and alcoholism. Right. If you want to get a read on someone, have a look at their friends.
I've always, I've seen how their life and how their career spun out, and I realized I'm like, I don't want that for myself.